I call to order the regular meeting of
Microphone.
of the Ojai Planning Commission. Thank you. Yes, I call to order the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission for Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. Sherry, could we have a roll call, please?
Chair Quilisi?
Here?
Vice Chair Nolan?
Here.
Commissioner Lottis?
Here.
Commissioner Bennett?
Here.
Commissioner Trent is absent.
Very good. Pledge of Allegiance, Commissioner Lottis, would you lead us?
Ready? I'll begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have time for public communications, the time set aside during this meeting for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on items not on the agenda. I know we received some emails, but it was all on one of the agenda items.
That's correct.
Do we have anyone in the waiting room?
We do, but nobody has their hand raised.
No one raised hands. Okay, then we'll move on to the consent items, the minutes of the regular meeting of April 6th and of April 20th, minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Any commissioners have any refinements to those minutes?
Just one editorial.
Yes.
Page 3 of 4.
Which of the?
Oh, the April 6th.
April 6th, okay.
Just, I think, let's see, under Chair opened the commission deliberation, I just think it should be there were detailed discussions.
Yeah,
That's minor, very minor.
sounds good.
That's it.
Sure, Sherry will take care of that. It's not even on the signature page. That'll be easy. Any other refinements? I found one typo on page 2, so. Where it says 3,A.2, it should be 3.A.2. Yeah, fixed. Okay. I'll entertain a motion for approval on the consent items.
All right, well, go ahead and make a motion that we approve the minutes of the regular meeting and Planning Commission, April 6, 2022, with that one minor change, and apparently the one Steve just brought up was changed. Was that correct?
Yes.
And then also the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, April 20th, 2022.
Okay. Is there a second? Thank you, sir. Any discussion? All right, Sherry, would you call the minutes? I'm sorry, did you have something?
I wasn't here, I was not here for April 20th, and I haven't had a chance to listen to the tape, so I'm not sure what to do. Anyway, I'm fine with the meetings on April 6th, but I was not here for the April 20th.
The 20th, yeah.
Yeah, you can
I'll
have,
just abstain.
Yeah, in that case, you can
Should we
abstain.
vote
I'll
on them
abstain.
separately?
I would take separate actions, yes.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to separate.
A motion,
Yeah,
change your motion
change my
to the
motion.
6th.
Yeah, and we'll start with accepting the, approving the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, April 6th, 2022, with the minor change, or,
Still okay with the seconder? All right.
Okay.
Sherry?
Okay.
Quilisi?
Yes.
Nolan?
yes?
Lottis?
Yes.
Bennett?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
And then I'll make a motion also that we approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, April 20th, 2022.
Okay.
Bennett? You're fine with
I'll,
this?
Second.
a second, okay,
Okay.
great.
Quilisi?
Yes,
Nolan?
Yes?
Lottis?
Abstain.
Bennett?
Yes.
Thank you.
terrific. All right. Now to the meat of the meeting. Item number 3, review of cannabis regulations. Lucas?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Quilisi. Good evening, members in the audience, members in video or TV land. The item you have before you tonight is the review of the cannabis regulations pursuant to Title IV, Chapter 26, Cannabis Use and Cultivation. As this commission will recall, this commission first started discussing this item back in March. Staff then went back. There were some questions that were asked. Went back, did some research, provided responses to those questions within the staff report tonight. I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through as well, but I will admit the PowerPoint really focuses on the 3 recommendations that have been provided for commission to kind of chew over and to figure out where they stand and where to go from there.
3 issues to recommend on to the city council.
Correct. I wanted to first start by identifying the 3 points that council had asked for the commission to consider. And the first one, and it's within the background report as well, but I just wanted to remind the commission, but also the community that's listening in here as well. The first one is that we're looking to discuss and recommend an action to the city council whether or not to allow on-site consumption lounges in compliance with state law along the east end, which is within the C1 zoning district, east of North Fulton Street along Ojai Ave. The second point that the council had brought forward for planning commission to consider and provide a recommendation is to discuss and recommend an action to city council whether or not to allow retail dispensaries to move outside the M1 MPD zones into the east end, which is once again the C1 zoning district, again east of North Fulton Street along Ojai Avenue. And then the third point to consider is discussion and recommend an action to the city council whether or not to allow limited scale indoor nursery use cultivation licenses located within the M1 MPD zoning district. And those were really the 3 points that, and I know it was brought forward for discussion at the last meeting, but I think it's important that when we're having this discussion that we set the table for the parameters that we're looking at here. I know in certain circumstances we may get into to more detail or go down a rabbit hole on certain aspects, but the reality is that we're kind of looking at an overall concept, kind of a bigger picture in terms of what we're looking at here tonight. So with that, I do have a PowerPoint that I'd like to run through, and I think it'll help to kind of frame the discussion for tonight because there is a lot to consider, a lot to weigh in. I'm sure the commission is going to have questions.
Public comment.
We'll have public comment as well, and then there'll be an opportunity for deliberation between commissioners. And then obviously Q&A that could come from that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned 3 points to discuss tonight. The first one with on-site consumption lounges. In the admin report, it says within M1 MPD or along East Ojai Avenue.
Correct.
So that's really
Two
1A and 1B, if you will.
Two different pieces to tackle, exactly. Well, it is three basic questions. Within that one is a sub to that as well. So let me just share my screen here. Hold on. All right. So tonight we're looking at the first point, which is consumption lounges as options. And as Chair Quillisi had noted, there's really 2 subsections to that, or 2 sections, I would say. On-site consumption lounges within the M1 MPD zoning district, which currently is not allowed. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the expansion of what we're talking about here. In the report, but I'll just mention briefly right now, dispensaries, manufacturing, and labs are what we have regulations for and guidelines for. We allow 3 dispensaries, we allow 2 manufacturing, we allow 1 lab. Right now, we have permits are in the works for businesses opening for all 3 of those aspects. So we're at max capacity right now.
In the regulations that are part of the packet, you also talk about micro businesses, which are vertically integrated, doing all of those things. Do you consider that a separate category of business with a separate number of possible licenses?
No, it's built within the parameters that we're talking about here. So it's still the 3, 2, and 1 that we're talking about. But within the discussion, there is I don't want to jump ahead here. I kind of want to go point by point through here, but they're looking ahead. There's the possibility of having that discussion. We've looked at, well, one other city within Ventura County, and that one has taken some of those standards that we're looking at and has blown them up and expanded upon those standards. And that's probably one to take a look at as we kind of look through it. I mean, I read a lot of information on, and the city is Port Hueneme. They've just recently adopted standards. I don't want to jump ahead here in terms of what we're looking at. I kind of want to go point by point here, but that's a good point. So on-site consumption lounges within the M1 MPD zoning district. Here we're looking at different types of modifications or mitigation to that. Smoking, vaping, edibles is one aspect that's kind of a full bore. Peeling it back and looking at maybe only edibles only. Within that, there's some limitations or mitigation that we could be looking at with this. As examples, limited hours, number of lounges, alcohol consumption is also another to consider, and then obviously no consumption lounges within the M1 MPD zone could also be something that's considered with this commission moving forward, and that could be a recommendation that this commission could consider. On-site consumption lounges on the east end of Ojai Avenue. If you recall correctly, or as a reminder, it's east of North Fulton Street. And that's really outside of that 600-foot, there's this 600-foot boundary or buffer, if you will, around schools, public and private, around youth activity centers, as well as child care facilities. So it's those three pieces of the puzzle that talk about this 600-foot buffer. On-site consumption lounges also revolve around within the east end the consideration of smoking, vaping, edibles, or peeling it back and saying edibles only. And then we're looking at the potential as mitigation or even consideration as limited hours, number of lounges, or even, once again, no consumption lounges along East Ojai. I would like to preface also with the differences between smoking, vaping, edibles, and then the edibles only. Our code currently has prohibition regarding smoking. That is already in place. We're talking
Anything.
Yeah, we're talking about peeling that back and then what that would look like. I don't necessarily, for tonight's discussion, I don't know we necessarily want to get into the weeds on what that would look like. It's just a matter of whether or not this commission wants to take that into consideration, moving that forward as a recommendation to council. So before I go on to the second piece, I think it's good to kind of help frame where some of this is coming from. So Port Hueneme has implemented regulations. Those are, and that's just recent, within the last 2 months, essentially. We're looking at cannabis lounges that are not but Port Hueneme. We're looking at as a discussion cannabis lounges in conjunction with established dispensaries, lounges located within existing dispensaries or adjacent to existing dispensaries, and then lounges which are membership only. And reading the text that they have within that, they're looking at that being a limitation or a kind of a framework for limiting customers and the potential for intoxication levels. And then prohibition consumption of tobacco and alcohol. I had mentioned the alcohol. We already have the prohibition regarding the tobacco, or at least the smoking. And then there's a cap of 5 lounges allowed. So they're basically putting a ceiling to that. And then there's 14 dispensaries within the city of Port Hueneme currently. There's 9 that are on the ground currently and 5 that are currently in review. So 14 is kind of the ceiling for Port Hueneme, and then the cap of 5 lounges. I think it's important because one of the things that I think the commission had asked was, well, what other communities currently have this? And your best example of that is, and really the only example currently, is Port Hueneme.
In Ventura County.
In Ventura County. I think it's important that I preface that.
And what's the population of Port Port Hueneme, roughly, compared to Ojai? 3 times our size? 4
Yeah,
times?
I mean, we're the smallest.
Sure.
within- I think it's close to 3 times what we are.
Okay.
So, population.
Population's probably 20,000 or so.
Now, mind you, with this PowerPoint that I'm using here, we absolutely can go back to these slides and talk through each of these points. I'm just kind of giving the high points here for kind of setting the table for tonight.
You want us to wait for questions till you're
Well, if you want to ask questions as it comes up, I'm fine with that as well. But the deliberation piece, I want to hold off until. Okay,
Sure.
May I ask one question then?
sure.
Okay, and this is in regards to, like, say, childcare facilities. Did you also include, if there are any, ones that may be licensed in the residential zones in proximity to Ojai Avenue?
Yeah, I looked at all childcare facilities, because it doesn't necessarily say whether. Now, residential is something that is not peeled back as a 600-foot radius piece. Per state law, those 3 uses were the 3 uses that were identified: the schools, the childcare, and the youth activities.
Yeah, and the only reason I brought it up, I'm not even sure if there are any now, but I can remember over the years, a private resident in their home could actually get the license, with the limited amount of children, and get certified.
Yeah, and those are typically through the state because they put certain
I wasn't sure
parameters
if
on
that
that.
was included.
That one doesn't show up on our radar
Well, that's what I wasn't
specifically.
sure about, and I thought, well, okay,
Right.
Okay.
No, that's a good question.
yeah.
I was simply focused on the commercial aspects, so along Ojai Avenue and other commercial areas. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
What does limit SF, what is SF?
Square footage.
Square footage. Yeah.
You'd
It had
also-
If I could just jump in here, Lucas, as well, the distance from residential housing is also something that the Planning Commission could consider in its recommendations tonight to the City Council. So if that's a mitigation measure that the Planning Commission would like to discuss, I think that's something that's definitely can be discussed later on tonight.
Yeah, because remember, it's the regulations. Thank you, Epi. The regulations themselves have been framed, but that's not to say that the city could look further at adding certain residential uses or specific categories, and then placing specific buffers
Practically
around
everything
those as
we're
well.
discussing
Is-
would involve a change to the code and a change to the regulations.
I think that's important to note. Anything that we're looking at here tonight would also taking any of those recommendations forward would then also require, unless the recommendations tonight are to do nothing, then that's the recommendation to City Council, and they can chew the fat at that point. But yeah, any of these pieces that we're talking about here are code amendments, essentially text amendments to the code. So retail dispensaries, that's the second point, along East Ojai Avenue, allowing existing to expand. That would be the 3 that we currently have on record. Allowing existing to relocate, same hours or even reducing hours. Now, mind you, these are some of the mitigation or some of the flexibility pieces that I'm thinking about just rationally. There could be other ones that we have a discussion tonight about for consideration. I'm trying to set the table here for discussion tonight. And then issuance of new permits, potentially expanding the 3 retail dispensary limit that's currently here. Once again, that would be a change to the code that we currently have. So, and then obviously the 4th is no expansion of dispensaries. And then the third point is the nursery options. So, indoor nursery only cultivation licenses located in the M1 MPD districts. Currently, as you know, nurseries just aren't allowed, period. But if the commission is interested in making a recommendation to council for something like that, it could be something like limiting to the M1 or MPD district, or limiting the area of the nurseries in terms of square footage. I put something like a maximum of 100 square feet. And during in terms of doing the research, 100 square feet, when you start doing vertical cultivation, it does end up being a sizable amount. So that was just kind of a starting point from a conversation standpoint, 100 square feet. ends up being more than what you would normally think.
So I do have a question about the nursery, or potential nurseries. Microphone.
Oh, yeah, turn the mic on.
I was saying I had a question about the nurseries. So, yeah, normally a nursery is not permitted there and would probably be, I guess the question is the nursery considered like a wholesale nursery or is it retail? In other words, if they're growing it there on site, do they have retail customers coming in or are they growing a mass amount? Somebody, they're delivering it or somebody's picking it up and it's going somewhere else for retail distribution.
I think there's a combination of the two that you could consider.
Could be either
It
one.
could be either
Or
one.
we could,
In terms of what I'm seeing, nurseries
Yeah.
are before it flowers, which is where that smell starts. You start getting
Right.
that smell piece, and that can be anywhere from 1 to 4 months before you start seeing the flowering. The flowering could be earlier depending on the strand from what I'm seeing and what I'm reading as well.
Yeah.
So I think
So
it's important to understand that.
distinguish.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the third piece is no nurseries. It's status quo in terms of how our regulations currently read. So, mitigation, if considering this, I know odor control was something that was discussed. Rather than kind of massaging what that looks like, identifying maybe in a general format saying, look, there's concerns regarding X, Y, and Z. Odor, I think, is certainly something that this commission has identified, and I would say to a certain degree the community has identified. Water circulation, I think that's an interesting conversation and discussion in terms of finding ways to be efficient about the water use as well. So with that ends my presentation, but like I said before, I'll stop sharing screen, but we can absolutely come back to this, and I employ that when we have the discussion that we come back to this. But I'll stop for now and see if there's any questions of the commission. Sure.
I have a question. If you can sense, and the answer may be no, whether any of the currently licensed dispensaries have interest in, one, seeing the number of dispensaries expanded, or two, putting a lounge next to their existing facility. They're putting a lounge next to their existing facility.
I think there may be some representatives here. I'd rather have them speak to it. But the whole reason for this discussion coming forward, and the whole reason why council had this discussion, is because there was an interest from the cannabis community to explore the potential for expansion, to take a look at what that aspect looks like. Port Hueneme kind of taking that first step forward, and Ventura County, I think, has kind of set the tone. The five lounges that we're talking about here, that's the maximum that they have in Port Hueneme currently. The 14 that you're seeing as the possibility is certainly well above what we have currently and within our regulations. But I also am, if you look at our regulations over the years, that was kind of meant to be kind of a starting point to get businesses to come in here. We were kind of groundbreaking in terms of how that was done. But now we're starting to see other cities that are being a little bit more aggressive about it. And I think you're probably going to see other cities do the same thing more than likely in the future. However, they're not Ojai, and that's why we're here to talk.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at this point? All right. Then, don't think I had anything in here. Yeah, the only thing I noted.
I would, Chair, if you could,
Yes.
we received 5 comments. I wanted to make that known tonight as well.
Right.
And they range from support to showing concern. So it was kind of across the board, pro and con, essentially. So.
Sherry circulated all of them to us.
And yes, and the commission should have those, exactly.
Okay. The only question I had to do with the buffer zone. and we've talked about this already. In the regulations, it talks about a 300-foot buffer zone for micro businesses and 600 for all the others. So I think
And that, so
600 is the state law, so we probably
even,
just need to
even
fix
if we
that.
have enough within our regulations something that is inconsistent, the state regulations still trump
Yeah.
the regulations that we have. So it's saying 300, but the reality is it's 600.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And one testing lab. Yep, all right. Well, let's open the public hearing then to public comment. I have 4 cards here, people that have requested to speak to the commission, and I'll take them in order that they arrived here at the desk. First is Bill Miley. Please come up, sir. You have 3 minutes to regale us.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Bill Miley. I've lived here since 1968. There are 5 decision points I'll speak to. 1, rezone portions of East Ojai Avenue. 2, if yes, should it be an overlay? 3, permitting cannabis consumption lounges either in the present locations and if smoking. 4, permitting cannabis consumption lounges in the new zoned area. And 5, should cannabis plant nurseries be permitted? Point A, the 600-foot buffer space could place limitations on nearby property owners wanting to lease their facilities or start businesses for children and youth. B, the planning director listed East Ojai Avenue as it could need help in being revitalized. I may have missed the council discussion about East Ojai needing revitalization, but it's not on my list. Current open space seems good. C, cannabis business would benefit from multimodal transportation. I know that the trolley doesn't go out there. Dispensaries do deliver, but there's no sidewalk going out to those businesses for people who want to walk or wheelchair access. D, in using Google Earth, I looked at empty parcels in this east section of Ojai. There appears to be 6 plus the businesses. E, so far there's been no public support or lack of support for cannabis businesses on Ojai Avenue by the business community or the chamber. It would seem expression of opinion is needed and important. F, what's best for Ojai? It would seem that flexibility within zoning designations should be maintained. I cut a lot of this out, which I sent you. G, permitting growing of nursery-sized cannabis plants seems logical, reasonable, except for one factor. What do you do when they don't sell and they grow up? And H, in a recent public speech to your commission, I supported fairness for cannabis business in compared to alcohol. In this meeting's administrative memo about cannabis, its effects on driving commentary was quoted from Police Chief Vieira. I wanted to read it, but I don't have the time. At the most recent City Council meeting, Chief Rivera detailed sheriff collected data for 2021 for the city, including vehicle. Few were under the influence of cannabis. And based on the above, I'm the opinion it should be carefully done. It should take time in doing cannabis business expansion. So I believe that no rezoning or overlay zoning should be done unless the Chamber of Commerce is formally asked by the City Council for its analytic position on the question. Therefore, in conclusion, I will only support 2 expansions, and that is nurseries and cannabis lounges at the current dispensary locations. No new dispensary licenses. I like the Port Hueneme membership, and this is important. It would seem logical that cannabis lounges should be permitted to be restaurants serving food, like restaurants serving alcohol. This would be a much more healthy balance. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Next up, Chelsea, is it Cetula?
Yes, Cetula.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you in person. I'm Chelsea Cetula. I'm the CEO and owner of Sesame Creek. I would be an applicant if there's actually an application. So I'm here to answer all your questions. I'm going to cram as much into this 3 minutes as I can. Today, I've also asked a couple other people, hopefully they'll join in over Zoom, that are experts in 1, Cannabis Lounges, and 2, Cannabis Nurseries. They're not from Ojai, but they would be partnering with me or the city. They can just inform the discussion. They're not scary outsiders, to preface that. At the last meeting, one of the commissioners made a comment to the effect of what problem do these things solve? So I want to address that. What problem does a consumption lounge solve in Ojai? My simple answer is that it gives a lot of people in Ojai something they want, something they don't have now, something that is legal by broad support in California, and something that CESP can create in a way that Ojai loves and embraces. And I'm really sad if you have not yet visited Sesame Creek Dispensary on Bryant. I think you owe it to yourselves to do the homework and come visit the shop and see what it's about, and dispel any myths that might be lingering in your brains about what we're trying to promote here. It solves a problem that alcohol is far more dangerous and toxic than cannabis, but far more accepted culturally, which means that you can go get drunk in a bar every 50 feet in downtown Ojai. But if you'd rather smoke a joint socially or share a vape with your friends instead, you're out of luck. Go do it in your car and keep it to yourself. It solves the problem that there are no alternatives to bars in Ojai for adults that want to socialize without alcohol. That's a public health problem. What does an overlay zone on East Ojai solve? It solves the problem that we are relegated as retailers to the only industrial area in town. Other maybe industries would like to use that space. Via Bryant Street, which, as Bill Miley mentioned, is not served by public transportation and is neither pedestrian nor wheelchair friendly. I see a person in a wheelchair off-roading once a week to get to our dispensary. I think that's a shame. It solves a problem that the city wants and depends on our tax revenue, but has not afforded us the same visibility and access to customers that it gives every other retailer and bar in town. CESP alone has paid over $166,000 in gross receipts tax, not sales tax, gross receipts tax to the city of Ojai since last January. Our sales tax revenue, not gross receipts tax, but the sales tax revenue during the pandemic when hotels were shut down, kept the city afloat. An overlay zone solved the current problem of taxation with discrimination, which is what cannabis is dealing with. The nursery solves a very small problem. It's still a problem, producing something locally versus having it transported in from LA or up north. It's a very small footprint, none of the odor control problems, because these plants are seedlings or clones. They have to be destroyed if they get too big. I can create a few new jobs with this. I can create added licensing and tax revenue for the city, and I can work with small craft cultivators to keep heirloom genetics alive. There's a big battle in the industry right now to preserve small legacy farms because big corporate ag is taking over this industry, and the biggest corporate cannabis greenhouse at 5.5 million square feet is in Camarillo and is operating right now. That's cannabis. We don't want that. We don't want big cannabis. Right? This is Ojai culture. We don't want big chain. We don't want big cannabis either. That's not what we want. And we want to live our ideals. We want cannabis consumers to pursue our own right to life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. And we want to put an end to reefer madness once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up, Mr. Wyrick.
As the maker of the motion that brought this to you for consideration, I thought I would appear just to speak a little bit about the context and motivation for that motion. The motion passed with the majority of council, did not pass unanimously. There was one dissenting vote. So to be fair, I'm not speaking for every single council person. The motion was made, the genesis for this really started in the general plan testimony, speaking about the problem of not being consistent with our general plan in the manufacturing plan development district. We have retail going, which is actually in the that was done for purposes of initiating normalization, destigmatization of the cannabis industry in our manufacturing plan development zone, but it's not consistent with our general plan. And there was a fair amount of discussion about how, you know, we need to have encroaching incompatible uses with our, or inconsistent with our general plan for that zone, actually are undermining our efforts at diversifying our economy away from just tourist options, for example. In terms of the motion, it was interesting that we began the discussion about, you know what, in terms of this general plan consistency issue, why not have an area of retail that would, in a C1 zone, that would basically add another permitted use, namely cannabis dispensaries in terms of a particular part of our C1 zoning. I was surprised that night at the number of council members that said, well, you know, look at all these options. Why we just want to look at retail? We want to look at strengthening our local-owned, local-focused, local-control cannabis industry for our community in a way that better serves the community. And maybe we need to think about this in terms of the East 1 and C1 zone. Never contemplated, by the way, is an increase in the number of licenses. That never came up in the discussion with council at all. I just want to make that clear. Not that it's not an option, like staff said, but that didn't come up in the discussion with council. So what we were talking about was, I was sort of surprised at the time at the maker of the motion that there was a second and then a vote, like, let's just look at all the options, not just a couple. I was trying to set up that we maybe look at one at a time to recommend for the Planning Commission to look at, and it was a 4-to-1 vote to send the whole package to you to look at rather than just a piece of it. So basically, you can infer what you want to in terms of the sense of the majority of council from that. But I do think that the sense of the motion was, please look positively at this option as a way of normalizing this economic activity within the context of what's good for Ojai. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Last up, Peter Denson.
Peter Dane. Thank you. Before I start my timer, I just wanted to express my gratitude for this body. I know you're all here in a volunteer capacity. And for everyone who's here tonight, we're all trying to make Ojai a better place, and so I'm grateful for you all and for everyone here. I will start my timer. My name is Pete Dane. I am an Ojai native and Ojai resident. I just moved back home after 12 years of military service. During my years of service, my specialty was high seas narcotics interdiction. So I spent a lot of my time over my last 15 years away from Ojai, out in the tropics on the high seas, interdicting bulk cocaine as well as marijuana, cannabis.
Coastie.
I'm a coastie. One of my areas of responsibility was the proper execution of maritime law for surface assets and air assets across the entire Western Hemisphere, including the coastal California region, where the bulk of the cannabis interdictions would take place. So as a military veteran, as an Ojai resident, and as someone who was an executor of the war on drugs, why am I standing before you here tonight? Since leaving the service to focus my energy on a different crisis, a climate crisis, I'm an environmental writer and educator. I've found cannabis to be an indispensable tool for my mental and emotional well-being. After losing my best friend in a helicopter training accident, after losing Chief Terrell Horn off the coast of the Channel Islands in a smuggling incident, which you may be aware of, which is widely reported, cannabis has been such a crucial tool for me on a personal level. I also stand before you tonight because where I see injustice, I can't help but move toward it. That's where I find myself, where I am in most of my endeavors in life. And I see cannabis as a plant that's been unfairly maligned. It's been part of human culture for the past 10,000 years. Archaeological evidence shows that. For the past 100 years, it's been prohibited. And so what we're talking about here tonight is how we reintroduce this plant back into society in a way that's healthy, not just for us on an individual level, but on a community level, on a collective level. What does it look like to have this plant back in our lives? We saw alcohol take 3 decades to come out of prohibition and be reintroduced into all the states completely. And so we're at an early point now, right? Just less than 10 years out from legalization in California. Ojai was a pioneer in bringing cannabis back to the people. And so Lucas asked the question, all these cities are opening up, dispensaries, cannabis lounges, but we're Ojai. So what are we going to do? And so what I propose we do is let's be the community that when people come to Ojai, when they visit the Ojai Valley, our 1 million+ visitors every year, what do they leave Ojai with? Like, wow, those people are doing something different there, whether it's with their relationship to water or land or open spaces or with our waste. Let's be innovative. Let's be the place where they leave and they say, wow, that was a cannabis lounge experience. Like, what a novel thing, a healthy, embodied relationship with the plant. If you're imagining a place that is maybe like the hub, like a dark, dingy, carpeted, hazy, smoke-filled room. I imagine you to think bigger, because what Chelsea has done at Sespe Creek Collective, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, it was just recognized as not only the first in California or the first in the United States, but the first in the world to be a regeneratively certified Sun and Earth partner brand. So whatever you're imagining to be a cannabis lounge to look like, flip it on its head, and that's what I imagine Chelsea and anyone else who wants to open a space in Ojai. We can guide them toward something that looks really good, something that's well thought out and intentional, and we can create a space for people like me who I don't enjoy alcohol so much. I use that to suppress the loss of my friends over the years, and cannabis is such a heart-opening, mind-expanding tool for me. I think we would be in a much better place collectively, given the state of the world, if we embrace it as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and come back to deliberations by the commission.
What about Zoom? Anybody on Zoom?
We do have a hand raised.
Do we have a hand raised? Okay, well, let's bring him in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, good evening, Chair and fellow commissioners. My name is Jackie Subeck, and I'm a longtime cannabis policy advocate and a resident and one of 16 consumption lounge licensees in West Hollywood. I'm speaking in favor of your recommendation to council and staff to allow for cannabis consumption lounges in Ojai. I was invited to speak to you tonight by dispensary owner Chelsea Cetula from Sespe Creek. I have spent the last 7 years focused almost exclusively on consumption lounge policy at the state level and locally, including helping West Hollywood craft their cannabis ordinance back in 2017, as well as the city of Los Angeles itself. I've already been down every regulatory path, and I've either flagged it or fixed it. All lounge licensees will have a state retail license, but locally there's 2 different models that may call for 2 different types of locations. The first you know about is the retail plus lounge model, where a local jurisdiction can authorize a licensed retailer the ability to have an ancillary consumption area in or near their existing premises. The idea here is that the customer purchases product in the store and then enters that permitted lounge space to consume. No transactions are happening in the lounge. You buy it in the store, consume it in the lounge. And that model is already supported by the state and solidified in statute. The second model, one we created in West Hollywood, is the standalone lounge, which is more like a bar or a restaurant. Customers visit the lounge and they make purchases specifically for on-site consumption, including regular non-infused food and beverage. There's no dispensary in that model, so no unopened packages will leave the premises, but all purchased leftovers can be repackaged in compliance for the customer to safely take home. What's great about that model is that it's not limited to existing cannabis retailers, and in fact, may appeal more to restaurateurs or other hospitality folks looking to open a business in Ojai. And of course, there's no alcohol allowed on any licensed cannabis premises, but just so you know, there are workarounds that we figured out in West Hollywood, including a side-by-side business model. It's also important to note that neither of these models today by state law can sell any freshly prepared cannabis infused items that aren't pre-packaged. So you can't have your chef cooking with cannabis just yet. I think that's probably 3 to 5 years away before we can fix that at the state. And finally, I just needed to add this in. I need to go on the record with this. West Hollywood made a huge mistake creating a license type for edibles only, costing them an exorbitant amount of money, unnecessary costs, and delays. There is no business viability for an edibles only model. And in fact, we had to run a costly ballot measure in 2020 to fix it. So please, please, please do not make that mistake. All lounges should have the right to have all cannabis uses on site. It's the only way it works. I'd love it if you would allow each of the existing 3 dispensaries to open an ancillary lounge at their location now, if they really want to, while you figure out if you're going to be able to move their businesses to a commercial zone where they really should be. Cannabis lounges are a place for everyone 21 and older, and people like to, go to relax after work. Moms and dads need breaks from their kids. There's all kinds of reasons. So, this is pioneering, and I get it, but it's absolutely doable. And in fact, all of our research shows that regulated cannabis consumption lounges are favorable to public health and public safety, significantly more than bars. So plus, they're going to bring a lot of great tax revenue to the city. So I'm available for questions at a later date if you guys want to dig into this. But either way, I hope that you choose to move this item forward this evening for council consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else out there with a raised hand, Sherry?
I have a question for
Hold
the-
on, there is one more now. Oh, she did raise her hand again. It's the same. No, it's a different person. It's an Isadora Chesler.
Okay.
Yes, hello. Thank you. My name's Isadora Chesler, and I really appreciate this coming up and being a discussion that we can have in our city. There are so few places for us to go in this city and to congregate with other like-minded people. I was just looking on the internet, and I see there's about 19 places in the local area that you can go get alcohol, but there's 0 for marijuana users. And I also looked up the statistics of current adult users of marijuana, and it looks like it's about 1 in 5 adults are current users in the state of California. So I'd imagine that those statistics really point out, just looking at the data alone, it's not an emotional thing, it's just reality. And like Chelsea mentioned, it's like people in their cars versus congregating, being around like-minded people, having a community like Pete mentioned. It really is something to strive for. And if you visited places like Amsterdam, you see what that might look like. Of course, we have a tiny town. Amsterdam is a city, but just one establishment would be so fantastic. So I really appreciate this conversation, and I hope this can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have a question
Yes.
for the person who had spoken from West Hollywood, and I didn't understand the point she was making about the success of certain kinds of retail establishments where consumption was allowed. If she could restate that, I would appreciate it. I believe she was saying that allowing edibles only as opposed to smoking and other consumption
Was a
together
mistake.
was a mistake. And I want to make sure I understand that.
That's what I heard as well, but ma'am, can you go ahead and restate that?
Absolutely. I wanted to squeeze it into the 3 minutes. So thank you for asking that question. I'm happy to elaborate a bit. So when West Hollywood first created the lounge licenses, they did 2 types, a smoking type and an edibles only. The intent of the edibles only licenses was to be able to have chefs on site preparing fresh food that was infused with cannabis, and it's a whole experience that people go through. But the state banned the ability to do that. And so then you have this, so now you have a banned, you cannot do that yet. And so what an edibles lounge would be, if you open it up, was a place to sell pre-packaged edibles, the same ones you can just go to a dispensary and buy. There's no business model at all. And so we actually, like I was saying, we had to go to a ballot measure in order to fix that. So if all you can sell, if there's no smoking and vaping on site, and all you can do and sell is sell edibles, I don't know if anybody on the commission is familiar with the way edibles work, but they're different than consuming, let's say, smoking a joint or a vape or anything else, because it goes through your digestive system. And so it takes longer to hit you. And so you may not feel the effects of what you've eaten for an hour, maybe 2 hours. Well, what are you going to do while you're just sitting there? There's nothing to do. So it just didn't seem to be any kind of viable path. We went down numerous pathways and we hit the wall every single time. And so now we realize that every lounge has to have the ability to have all types of consumption uses, because there's all types of customers. But I will give you this one nugget on this. One of the things that we did with the edibles lounges is we created a policy so that they are allowed to have X amount of square footage, like 50% or whatever of the square footage for customer area is available for smoking and vaping. And that has the odor control, air filtration, and all of that set up in there. The other area is actually an edibles only area. And so there you could have your bar with cannabis beverages because you can't have alcohol, but you could have cannabis beverages and you could serve food and other things. There won't be any smoking and vaping. And so that was sort of a nice compromise for those people that don't want to be around smoke, which is absolutely a lot of the population. So in order to be sensitive, that's what we did, is we did a sort of a combined situation. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I don't have a feeling for how many of these places are actually open, so you have a real world test of these various assumptions.
And the answer to that is, unfortunately, none are open now, but we're about to see 3 open in the next few months here in West Hollywood. That was part of the problem, is the delays, and this was one of the reasons. So now that it got fixed, people are starting to get ready to open. I do believe that San Francisco is also, I mean, these are big cities, I realize, but San Francisco is also working on a consumption lounge policy for restaurants as well, to try to get them open. Because the lounges that are open today, mostly in the Bay Area, are the kinds, they're the first model, the retail plus lounge model. There's tons of those up and down the state. But the new kind with the food and the restaurant, the hospitality and the lounge feel and all that, those are just getting ready to open in West Hollywood. Those will be the first. Palm Springs, or one of the, out in Coachella Valley, they have 1 or 2 of them getting ready to open as well.
Okay, so there isn't a track record right now. Did I hear you correctly that the state banned edibles-only lounges?
No, the state banned the ability for to cook with cannabis or prepare cannabis into food on site, fresh. Okay. You have to go through the supply chain, and it has to get tested and packaged. So, you know, if you wanted to make tacos and serve them, and you wanted to infuse the hot sauce and serve that taco in a hot sauce, today you cannot do it that way.
Okay.
Okay? But there's workarounds for that. It's just, that's what it was intended for. So thank you.
I have another question, and I don't know if our staff knows the answer to it, but let's give it a try. I know we had some report from the police saying that they did not see a significant problem with driving with cannabis use. Do we have any split out of that with alcohol and cannabis? The idea of mixing the two, I have no idea what history has shown about mixing the two.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I mean, as recent, because I have had a couple different conversations with Chief Rivera on this very point, and the data coming back is I'd say the data coming back is insequential, meaning it's not a significant increase. You're seeing probably more of a DUI related to the alcohol than you are, say, for instance, with cannabis or any other sort of altering type of, like, for instance,
intoxicant.
Yeah, like you could be on meds, right? That could also be something that could get you within a DUI or driving under the influence. It's not just alcohol. Everybody assumes alcohol. What is interesting, though, is that there isn't necessarily a measurable. There isn't necessarily something where you can measure how intoxicated you are with cannabis, like you can with alcohol. You basically blow, and you'll know immediately whether you're over the limit. There's already this set measure that doesn't exist for cannabis. It's just not there yet.
I'm wondering how the chief could say there were any DUIs with cannabis if there's no way of establishing it.
There is a way in which you can do it if you. I mean, they do a field sobriety test, so you could do the field sobriety. It comes back. One of the reasons that individuals may get pulled over is erratic driving, or if it's something that triggers an officer to pull them over that meets one of the standards, then yes, you can pull them. They would get pulled over. They'd go through the sobriety. If at that point there's still issues, they could even go in and have blood drawn at that point. There's other ways in which that could take place to see if it's in their system. The reality is it's just there.
But there's no legal limit.
There is no legal limit at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
in the research that I've seen thus far, there's a lot of different ideas on what they could do, but nothing's been implemented as a hard fact.
Yeah. Okay, are we through with questions for those who spoke during public comment? All right, then we will close the public hearing and deliberate as a commission. Who'd like to start?
I'll make some comments.
Good.
Well, this is very challenging. I mean, number one, I'm pro-business. I think everyone's got the right to use cannabis, you know, when they want, home basis. Medicinal stuff, great. I don't have anything against it. I'm having a little angst, maybe, about a lounge on Ojai Avenue. And I'm really glad to hear, I'm sorry, I forgot what your, Chelsea. Chelsea came up and also Peter Dane, you know, kind of dispelling the myth of, you know, this dark, gloomy, smoky lounge and, you know, potentially it could be something else. I will say while I was reading my packet, I kept thinking, oh, you need to pair food, food with cannabis, right? I mean, it's sort of a common sense thing, but it also kind of takes the persona or this myth that we're trying to dispel right now and bring something new to Ojai that hasn't been here yet, or even to the state for that matter. I mean, like we mentioned, all these different cities are, you know, kind of getting their feet wet with it and feeling it out and what does it look like and how does it work and is it compatible? So I'm just going to share a couple of things, and it's not my conclusion, but while I was reading my packet, I was kind of leaning towards edibles only. Now I just heard something different, and that the restaurant combination, which I found very interesting and, you know, could be very open to that. I also found myself going, a members only club, so to speak, if you came in and you wanted to consume. I'm not necessarily in favor of the smoking. I know it's not in our code right now, and maybe that's just more of a health issue. And then as far as the nursery sales, it sounds to me, if I'm understanding this correctly, it could be grown by, you know, the one of the, or retail or whoever, if it was new or one of the existing dispensaries, and it could be retail and or wholesale. So I guess that would have to be defined in the space, and what does that mean exactly? But I'm not necessarily opposed to that either. All right, let me see what else. I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts because I find that it's not like an easy answer here. I did have a concern about the residential buffer, and I had brought my question up earlier knowing that, and I'm not sure if there are any at the moment, but I know in the past there have been private citizens who have actually been licensed to have daycare in the residential areas, you know, behind Ojai Avenue or below Ojai Avenue. And that potentially could still be an issue, but that's something you didn't have that data to report on that. So that was a concern of mine. Let me see if I have anything else here. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there right now.
It's a start to the discussion.
And then
sure.
we're going to discuss things, and I just wanted to say that I'm open to, you know, where we go with this. I don't have a closed mind about it.
Commissioner Lottis, your thoughts?
Well, let's see. I guess I like to separate talking about these things on Ojai Avenue versus in the M1 MPD zone. Personally, I have much more hesitation and concerns about the overlay idea on Ojai Avenue, in part because I don't think any of there's a lot of residences out there. And we have not Sul Park, the other park on
Sarzati
Sarzati Park. We have Sarzati Park, which is definitely serving, I'm sorry. So I have two concerns. I mean, I feel that we ought to separate the industrial zone application of maybe some changes versus Ojai Avenue. And I have a lot more concerns about making changes on Ojai Avenue, in large part because we have a huge number of residences right next to them. I don't think that we have contacted those residences at this point. They weren't on any interest list or anything like that. I do know that if we were proposing an overlay zone, at that point, people within a certain radius would get noticed. But still, I'm concerned that the discussion here, or the input tonight, is largely from cannabis users. We're not hearing input from families or residences who would be nearby. I also think the Sarzati Park serves in large measure for the youth of our community, and that looks to me like that would be within a 600-foot buffer, and if we made the 600-foot larger, it certainly would. So anyway, I'm concerned about the families, residential use being very close to putting in marijuana, cannabis uses up there on Ojai Avenue. On the other hand, looking at the industrial zone, I'm really concerned about allowing smoking because we're a non-smoking city. So I just cannot, for the life of me, really understand why we can't, tobacco we can't do, but cannabis is okay. I think there are definitely some health studies coming out, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, CDC. There are definitely issues with inhaling a heated substance that has tar in it, lung scarring, lung diseases, maybe not necessarily cancer. But, and also, I mean, we don't allow hookah lounges, as far as I know. So either we're a non-smoking city or we aren't. And I take the side of, I think we need to stay a non-smoking city. And that said, if I would be open to discussion of on-site consumption in lounges with edibles, if in the future there were allowed food uses with it, maybe that's okay. At some point, the scope of this gets beyond my tolerance level in terms of kind of protecting the industrial zone for industrial uses. But that said, we've got 3 uses that are out there. If there's some minor allowances for expansion on on-site consumption with a lounge that's non-smoking, I'd be open to discussion about that. And the indoor nursery, again, with discussing that on the industrial side again. I'm real hesitant about putting anything like that up on Ojai. The indoor nursery with proper filtration, really dealing with regulating this so that it's not impacting anybody in terms of smell or sizing to increase the retail sales too much so that we've already got a fair amount of traffic coming out of there on Bryant Street. I see it when I'm trying to turn onto Ojai Avenue. So small nursery, I think I might be okay with discussing that, again, in the industrial zone. And I think, I think that's pretty much kind of summarizing where I'm coming from. And I have to say, in no way do I have any objection to the use of cannabis by anybody, an adult, on any moral grounds or anything like that. So I am not coming from a position of being opposed to cannabis. I'm coming from a position of making sure that we move with this carefully and incrementally and protect our residential areas and families in the community. So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bennett, some thoughts? We're not done with
No, I
exchanging thoughts here.
I too have no objection to the consumption of marijuana at all. I have, and we aren't being asked to opine on that matter anyway. So,
Right.
And I appreciate the fact that the city council has sent it to us, and that Councilman Wyrick has come tonight to explain what the context of that was. That is
We're actually doing this in regular order.
right. I appreciate that. It's a lot of issues, I must say, and each one deserves to be thought about and digested. I didn't realize when we were talking earlier, because people talk about West Hollywood as being ahead of us, but I didn't realize it hasn't happened yet. I mean, they're in the process of soliciting for, I guess, licensees, and that's to me very, very interesting on how much on the front edge all of this is. With alcohol, and I understand the concern that people have with the number of places where one can get alcohol in town, but for the most part, I don't see an abuse of alcohol in the restaurants in the town, and I don't see it in the Vine where I've been. I've not been in. I'm sorry. I'll move closer to the microphone. Yeah, I've not seen it in the Vine, which is primarily a bar. I've not been in the Hub, so I can't really talk about that. Which is I don't know if they serve food in there, but there were a lot of eye-opening things brought up here, and that is, one, it doesn't work. And that's sort of intuitive. If the only thing you can do is take a gummy bear and then wait an hour around for it to have some kind of an impact, that
Unlikely to do that.
Yeah, and I understand that, and that was sort of intuitive to me. I thought, well, if you make it consumption only, and it is a gummy that you're consuming, it's going to take a long time for that to have any impact. I can't see that the experience of hanging out in the lounge, waiting for it to have an impact, was going to be much of a social experience. I think that the city really made a good decision when it allowed the uses, and I think that the place that it chose, although I too am a supporter of keeping the industrial zone for industrial purposes, because we do have economic issues and the need to provide more jobs, and if we fill all those spaces with areas that have higher margins to them, we're not going to be able to get that economic base that we're hoping for. I think our job is to figure out what's best for Ojai, and having various zoning areas and regulation of what activities can take place, whether it's multi-family housing versus single-family housing, or commercial versus housing. We have quite a variety of categories of zoning, and it doesn't bother me that everything can't be done everywhere, and that the C1 ought to be a free-for-all for the retail that can take place there. If the city wanted to have pornography sold in a bookstore, I'm not sure I'd want to see it. I'm
having trouble hearing, please. You're speaking away from the mic.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'd ask you to sit here next to me, but I've got a feeling that wouldn't work. So anyway, I have some ambivalence about changing something that is as new as the regulations are in the city. I think we're still learning. We're certainly learning about the toxicity of cannabis. I guess I'd sure love to know a lot more about each one of the areas, alcohol and cannabis consumption simultaneously. I know there comes a moment to decide, but I'm not sure we're at that point. And I'm not sure I have enough information yet to make a strong, informed decision, which would be other than the one which the city has already made, which is to allow the three dispensaries. If it was the sense of this body that we wanted to expand it, I guess I would probably want to expand in place where we are, expand uses in place. So.
Okay. And we'll go back around again, for sure. As I look at the entire issue, I see arguments on both sides. There is the argument that there are a lot of places where you can purchase alcohol, consume it on site, and then drive home. We all know that there are lots of those. And consuming an intoxicating substance before you go out and drive home, to my way of thinking, is not a good idea. Everybody has a different level of tolerance for intoxicating substances, but in general, I think it's easier to argue that on-site consumption and then driving somewhere is perhaps more often than not a good idea. And so one might use that sense of an argument to say, well, you should at least treat us, the cannabis dispensaries, lounges, whatever, at least in the same way as you do alcohol, because we're talking about consumption on site and then drive home, particularly if it's smoking or vaping on site and then driving home. And I see an issue of equity there, and I agree that we have, in that sense, an inequitable system at the moment. At the same time, recalling Commissioner Lottis's note, we are a non-smoking city. How is it that smoking tobacco is a bad thing and smoking marijuana in a public place is not a bad thing? That seems to me incongruous as well. So one can be torn between just those two business models right there. Do we have equity, or do we have an increased likelihood of people driving while intoxicated with something? Last, the idea of expanding from an area which at an earlier meeting Commissioner Bennett said is not hard to find. People know where the dispensaries are. Moving that on to Ojai Avenue certainly raises the public awareness of all of this going on, but I'm not sure that the people coming up from Ventura on the 33 can miss, as I can't miss, billboards for Ojai Greens, and maybe there's one for Sespe, and maybe there's one for someone else too. I noticed the Ojai Greens because it's a very large billboard right next to the highway. It would be hard to drive from anywhere to Ojai and not notice that there's a marijuana dispensary in town, at least one. Finally, there was some discussion tonight about putting a buffer zone around residential areas. If we did that today, I think all of Persimmon Hill directly abuts all of these businesses. And a buffer zone of any size whatsoever would drive all these businesses out of town. There would be no space where cannabis businesses are allowed. And I'm persuaded that there is enough sense in the community that that would be a bad idea. I recognize the problem with children and smoke. We don't allow smoking of tobacco outside of private homes unless you smoke in your backyard and no one notices, I think, is kind of how it works. And I would be concerned about smoking marijuana in a public place and having children susceptible to secondhand smoke being in close proximity. But I don't know how to draw that line, because just because there are residential areas immediately abutting any of the locations where we have dispensaries today, or might potentially have lounges in the future. So I would tend to say I would not be in favor of putting a buffer around residential zones unless we can draw it very carefully and non-discriminatorily. And I haven't figured out how to do that. So that would be an exercise in gerrymandering, if you will. And I'm not clear on how to do that. The other thing that I'm struck by in the public comment tonight, as Commissioner Bennett noted, the cities that are moving ahead haven't taken the first step yet, by and large. And while I know there's a lot of sentiment in Ojai for being thought leaders in a variety of areas, this is one I'm not sure we want to be a thought leader in. I think it would be better if we were to watch, see what happens with lounges in Port Hueneme, get some real data on lounges in West Hollywood if they ever open. Same with Port Hueneme if they ever open, and other places as well. I don't feel a need to be a thought leader in this area, and I would like to see, does it cause more problems? Are we talking about a greater incidence of unspecified driving while intoxicated because there's no test to say you are legally intoxicated with cannabis? There may never be one. I don't know. There certainly is one for alcohol now, and I'm frankly astonished that the chief of police would have any opinion on whether there's a problem with DUI with cannabis, because you can't tell. At any rate, so I would come down on the side of leave it where it is. Let's let the rest of the world move ahead for the moment. We can come back to this anytime. I would like to leave it where it is, let the rest of the world move ahead, and let us see if there are problems that crop up with lounges, with consumption lounges with edibles, consumption lounges with smoking, vaping, and edibles, and if it is in fact happening anywhere else and we don't know because we haven't heard testimony tonight either way, are there any other cities that have dispensaries or lounges either in existence or planned on major routes within those cities? I don't know. And I'm happier right now with things where they are. I'm open to talking about making changes, but not if we're going to be the first ones to do it and wind up with, when you're manufacturing things, you talk about infant mortality. What kinds of things happen right after you've built something and they break or whatever? applying that principle to this issue, I would say we don't know what the problems might be in the first month or 6 months or whatever of implementing some really major changes in what we might do here in the city. And I would rather, the easiest way to learn is to learn from other people's mistakes, not your own. And I'd rather wait and see what other people's mistakes might be. Maybe there will be none. And that would leave us in a position of saying, fine, let's take some baby steps and do some of these incremental things, because others have shown that there is no net increase in DUI. There's no net increase in crime. There's no net increase in childhood secondhand smoke issues. I don't know. Any of those things could happen. I'd rather wait and see if somebody else makes the mistake. And then we can come back and make a more informed decision on whether we should do this in Ojai. So, yes, ma'am.
I have an idea. Because I tend to agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, and I know this is all new.
Yep.
And so, it's always, hard to make the leap. But I had a thought, could there be almost like a pilot project? Like a test where, and I'm not sure, I'm just putting this out there, that we stayed in the M1 MPD zone, didn't go onto Ojai Avenue right now. But for the existing dispensaries, if an agreement was made that they could maybe only do edibles, limited hours, and maybe the sale of the plant, limited amount of square footage or plants. And it was a test where, they tested it out for 2 years. I'm not sure we can even do that with the business license or not. But I guess it sounds like a lot of the code is being written, and as long as we didn't.
Anything that we change is going to be a code change.
Yeah,
So
it is a code change.
Don't worry about
So
that.
I'm not even sure if something like that could happen in this instance, but because it is so new, could that happen? Is that feasible?
That would be a recommendation if the full commission
Yeah,
is
wanted
on that
to.
same page. Could be
Yeah.
something that you take forward
Yeah,
to the council.
and in that way, I would be open to allowing that test or that pilot or transition. In other words, you could be gathering data, and, at a certain point, it's over, and they report back, did it work, didn't it work? If it didn't work, that's the end of it, or we need to go back to the drawing board. And part of it could be, we wait for certain data to come in, but it would exclude, the smoking or the vaping, potentially just be an edible allowance, that they could have an edible portion.
Yeah,
for-
yeah, the
exist-
logic that we've heard tonight
Yeah.
says edibles only may or may not be a good
Right,
financial thing to do
But if they're-
for the purveyors.
Right.
But I can understand the logic of not wanting to do only that.
right. But I'm just wondering, if it was economically feasible to do it within an existing dispensary, in other words, already have the location, I don't know if it makes sense or
Yeah.
not, but I'm just thinking of a pilot transition
Well,
way
the
to work
dispensaries
into it.
currently do sell edibles, right? Prepackaged edibles.
But not,
Correct.
you can't eat it, consume
No,
it
you can't
on
consume on
site.
site. That's the whole point of the
And
lounge.
this
You
way,
have to take it home and consume
you
it.
Right.
could. And as far as how much you eat and what type it is, and your body type and all that, it's gonna affect people, I may not have to wait an hour, depending if you're there because you wanna get high or whatever, or, have a reaction. So, I could be open to something like that if it was, doable.
And I think I don't know that I mentioned this in the initial presentation when we're going through the PowerPoint, but this commission, this body can look at it in terms of baby steps.
That's what
I
I'm
think
looking at, baby steps.
That's kind of what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah.
There is a little of
Yeah.
apprehension regarding this use, and even looking at expanding. doing some sort of a pilot program
Right.
is certainly something that this commission could take forward as a recommendation if the full commission or a majority or whatever we have for tonight. So anyway, I think it's important to just note that even though there's these three pieces that we've talked about earlier, Vice Chair Nolan just mentioned really two of those three within one grounded approach as kind of a pilot program. And you could even say, identify some of those mitigation pieces that you may have comfort with from that standpoint as well. I know some of those were mentioned in terms of hours of operation, the alcohol component, obviously, the age limitation. I think those were already things that just kind of from a use standpoint are logical.
Limitations probably in state law already, so.
Right, and those are already kind of already embedded, but I think stating those and restating them to make them clear. We do that a lot with state regulations. We adopt those so that it's very clear what regulations we're implementing. ADUs are a clear example of that. So I think that's certainly within the framework of what this body is looking at tonight. So continue discussing.
I have
Yes.
a question, and it's about the sale of individual plants for, and I'm
Not to mention the nurseries, yeah.
the nursery issue, and my we've got tomato mania going on here, and I can see consumers wanting to be able to grow their own. And what I don't know is, are there any issues in what we have in terms of the limitations that would limit somebody who bought some plants from using the seeds the next year? And maybe it's just biological, but maybe it's not. Using those same seeds from the plants they did in year one to then plant a larger personal area. I am very sensitive to the question of smell, and have been, as a drive on the 126, and when you get near Rancho Cumulus, there are a couple of patches out there, and they really smell terrible.
Or the 192 or north side of Carpinteria, the same way. Yeah.
I can see we're living next to that, and there is, no matter where you are in the city limits, wherever you are, you're closer to those fields, the agricultural fields, than you are driving down the 126 towards Rancho Cumulus. I also note that they are protected by armed guards when the plants get to a certain height, and the fields are I'm surprised that that's necessary. I mean, I'm very surprised
It's
it's
a financial thing.
with the value of that crop.
But the city does currently prohibit outdoor cultivation.
Correct.
By
in
commercial
as a
or-
business.
I think it's
Or
important to
personal?
note that any discussion that we're having regarding the cultivation would be a code amendment. It's not that it's not allowed. So, but if
Personal
you're,
cultivation
But if
inside
I'm
the
buying-
house is allowed, though.
Correct.
If I'm buying a plant, which let's say we were to pass something on this,
or you're talking about recommending to council.
recommending to council that it be expanded and people can sell plants, you're selling them to people to cultivate them at home, I presume.
Correct.
Which
That's
is
the
legal
idea.
at the moment.
Which is legal,
Yeah.
right. And so where does it stop being legal? Is that
In
defined
terms of
by-
residential, and Epi, if you could step in here, and I believe there's a certain number of plants that you're allowed to have, and I think it was an even number. I thought it was 6 or 8.
Right.
I don't have the number at the top of my head, but that is correct that there's a limit. So that's already addressed by state regulation. I guess is what I would say to the commissioner.
So I'm for certain it's an even
It's
number.
a
either 6
it's
or
a
8.
de minimis amount where odor
It
is not
is.
going to be.
It is. That's
And
the whole
it's,
point.
and it's honor system, frankly.
Right.
because it's inside your house.
Everything in this town is on our system. We have no enforcement of anything. So.
I take
have a
The commission
exception
want to
to
impose
that
stricter regulations
from a
on
code
this.
compliance standpoint.
I do have a question. So, okay, but if we were talking about nurseries, even a small scale nursery, are we talking about armed guards being necessary for that?
I wouldn't
So
think
it's
so.
it's indoor, and there's already fairly extensive
Security requirements.
security plans in place for the dispensaries, for manufacturing, and those types of measures could still be in place for even the nurseries. Like I was saying before in the presentation, there are examples of square footages. The vertical nursery aspect isn't interesting.
What's
where
that?
you've got it on top of each other, and you've got some sort of an intricate water
Watering
hydration
irrigation system.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very cutting edge in terms of what they're looking at doing. That's already employed to vegetable gardens currently. So there's different ways that can be done.
Hydroponics has been around for years.
Yeah, but just the way it's being done today, it's amazing. You can really go down a rabbit hole when you're looking into that stuff.
Yeah.
Truly. So anyway, everything we're talking about here tonight is certainly on the table. At the end of the day, if this commission does not feel comfortable moving forward with anything, we can also I can take that forward to the council as well. So it's all a part of the discussion that we're having tonight. Baby steps or...
There's one other thing, and that is if you look at attachment C, page 404, which is where there are
For the audience, this is an overhead map of the east end of Ojai Avenue.
Yeah, this map runs from, well, essentially along parallel to the golf course down to Gridley. And
That's the end of the city, right?
Well, it's the end of really where the C1 ends.
Right.
So if we're looking at boundaries, it's from Fulton to basically to Gridley.
Well,
east of
but I'm
Gridley
not
becomes
but I'm not
single
including
family.
necessarily all of that
Yeah.
because the point I want to make is that all of these properties are surrounded by single-family homes. If there isn't a golf course there and there are a lot of open lots that are there where I would think that the owners of of the single-family houses that surround on both sides of the street take some comfort that they're probably not going to see something like this as their next-door neighbor. And so to the extent that we change that, every one of them could be, and there are a lot of single-family houses in here, could be next to one of these uses.
I think this was an important exercise. The attachment C covers the C1 zone that we're talking about, but
Right.
in addition to that, and this was brought up at the meeting back in March, there was a question brought forward of what sorts of uses surround that type of within the C1. And it is primarily single family. There is some multifamily plugged in there.
Yeah.
There's some public land. Obviously, the golf course is identified there. Closer to Fulton, you do have some mixed use. You have some multifamily, and you do have industrial as well. But that's just on the very edge, I would say, of the western side, if you could say, of the western side of the east side of Ojai Avenue, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
But as you go further east, it really is primarily single family.
Yeah.
Correct.
I suspect if anyone, well, first of all, I have seen in other places regulations that said it's okay for you to smoke inside a closed office, for example, provided you have a big enough fan that throws all the smoke out, which takes it from being a public health hazard to being, from being a private health hazard to being a public health hazard. Diluted, but a public health hazard. And with the city having a ban on tobacco smoking, period, I don't know about edibles or other types of consumption. I don't know where the city stands on snuff and chewing tobacco, for example. I don't even know if it's in the code, and it's not relevant right now. But if we were to allow one kind of smoking in public places and not other kinds, I think we're creating more inequities, and we have enough right now, inequities. And that's why I would be concerned about putting a buffer around residential properties, because there wouldn't be anywhere except the middle of the golf course that you could have a dispensary. And that would be an interesting zoning problem all by itself.
But there's nothing that says that buffer would have to be 600 feet. In other words, in San Francisco, the buffers are 1,000 feet. So I think you could make it a smaller buffer, so that.
Now, I don't know how you'd buffer anything in Persimmon Hill
You're right up against it.
or anything along the north side of Ojai Avenue and not make all of those properties unusable for this kind of business. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem possible to me to do that right now.
I guess I'm not seeing the Persimmon Hill issue that you're.
Oh, it's back on page 2.
But
In
the,
two of
See,
four.
there's a circle around Weil Academy.
Right.
Okay, that reaches almost, it reaches sort of into the middle of Bryant Circle.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
all
yeah.
Persimmon
Okay,
Hill.
Right.
and so, because I have not been to any of the dispensaries myself, and I don't care who goes there, that's perfectly fine. But I have to think that all of the dispensaries that exist are on the south side of Bryant Circle, just outside that 600-foot buffer around Weil Academy. But none of them would be outside a buffer if there were a buffer around the residential properties in Persimmon Hill. You could have a 1-foot buffer, and that encroaches on that M1 or MPD property.
That's correct. It would create challenges. That was the whole reason for the exercise. I think there was, like I was saying before, there were several questions brought forward in terms of how many of these areas butt up against the C1 zone along the eastern side. And the results of that are the majority. And that's what you're seeing. Like I was saying, there are some one-off scenarios where you're seeing some mixed use or VMU
Or, yeah,
industrial, as well as some
south side between
R2
Fulton
or
and Bryant.
multifamily.
To the south of that, you don't have much in the way of residential.
Right.
There's a little bit along Fulton.
Correct.
So how do we move forward here?
Well, I agree with you, Steve. I think it's probably a little premature to move ahead at this point, and I think the value of gaining experience from other similar-sized communities, and even preferably communities that have high tourist demand. I would
West
like to
Hollywood
wait
qualify
and look
as
at
that? I
those
suspect
kinds
so.
of communities, and and maybe as the state law changes and they allow food preparation, that might be a point at which we could come back and relook at this. I am the CUP queen, I know, but I do think that this is an example of a use that it should not be, no matter what the regulations are, I think it should never be a permitted use. It should be a conditional use permit, because neighbors are notified before the use ever goes in. We have a chance to hear, input, concerns, create conditions specific to a particular property relative to the conditions around it. So, if we do revisit this at an appropriate time, I would want to see a real evaluation of doing this doing whatever changes we make, somehow wrap that into a conditional use permit, particularly within certain, a buffer of residential areas, so.
Some sort of buffer, but we have to be very careful with that.
Agreed.
If it's uniformly applied, then all these businesses are out of town.
No, it would just trigger the need for a conditional use permit if it's within a certain distance of residential areas. I mean,
Oh, I see.
or just
Okay.
make it, it would be
Yeah.
cleaner.
Or
to make it
waivers or
just a
variances,
flat,
or, yeah, which
just a
all
straight
gets
across
kind of
the
messy.
board CUP.
Yeah.
And I am still concerned about Sarzati Park because I don't know what the definition of youth center is, but that seems to be a youth center.
Right.
There's sports, there's indoor activities, I think there might be an after-school.
Yeah, like
kind
a YMCA is probably a really good example of that. The Boyd Center is probably a good example of that. If it was just a park alone,
But it's not.
doesn't qualify.
Right.
Unless it's built in. There are some of the cities that they have built-in
There's
parks.
Martin Gym there, for example, that
Yeah.
you'd have to think is a youth center of some sort.
Oh, there's youth
But-
programs.
Yeah,
But
it,
a 600-foot buffer around Sarzati Park doesn't affect anything that we're talking about.
Right, it's,
Here.
because it's. for
That's
far
the
enough
one.
Here.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
but these are 600 feet, aren't they?
Yeah.
So you do that,
It might get you down close to Ojai Avenue.
that's what I'm
I
thinking.
think it's
It may not, but
short, but.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, there,
It's-
It's a good
are
point.
a lot of students
It's,
or
yes, they're going,
that actually go down Park, they go down to
Right.
Ojai Avenue.
Right.
In other words, it's a thoroughfare to get to the park
Right.
and to Topa Topa Elementary. So there's a lot of use.
and I, coincidentally, I had dinner with a friend who lives down in Newport Beach, and it was part of just talking, and she just said, oh, yeah, she went to this, she went somewhere in Newport Beach, and there was a dispensary, and she said the smell, I mean, I don't know that the doors were open or anything, but just, it was really powerful, and it was like, if you're sensitive, I mean, it's great for some people, but then for other people, it's hugely a sensitive issue, and the smell is pretty awful, so, and that was from a on-site, what do you call it, on-site consumption place with a retail.
on-site consumption lounge
Yeah, with retail.
affiliated with a dispensary.
Yeah, so definitely, there's some,
Yeah, well, if
Good
you've ever
concerns.
driven by the Anheuser-Busch Brewery
I
up and
have,
down,
yes.
up and down the 405 in the valley, you know that makes its presence known far and wide as well. So it's not a unique situation with this business, but it can be a problem nonetheless. But, so what's the sense of the commission here? I'm kind of thinking, I'm hearing, let's not do anything right now and wait and see what happens elsewhere. But that's,
Yeah.
I'm saying it in part because that's the way I feel,
Right.
but,
I'm
we should
still-
agree as a commission
Right.
on some course of action.
Sure.
I'm still open to potentially some sort of a pilot program, like a test.
To do what, though?
Basically, not on Ojai Avenue, but for the existing 3 dispensaries would potentially, if they wanted to, and they'd have to work it out with the city on what it would look like, but the potential that they could have the edible consumption on site and, or the plant sales. I'm guessing that's 2 different licenses, additional licenses they would have to get, or one or the other. And it could be limited, but it's a way of like testing it out and maybe collecting data. And it's for a given period of time. Let's, report back, what happened, was it work, and then at that point, with the city, it could come back here and say, here's the data, here's what we collected, this worked, that didn't work. And at the same time, it would also,
And you're talking about edibles, not smoking and vaping?
yeah, only the
Okay.
edibles. But, and then, after a given period of time, hopefully Port Hueneme or West Hollywood or San Francisco, wherever else, there may be more information that has come in because they've opened or not to
Well,
see what's coming in.
yeah.
Because,
We
yeah,
have residential areas close to things now in the
Right.
cannabis business.
Right.
And so in that sense, we're already in the same position as some of those big cities.
yeah,
And so if they change the use, then there's gonna have some effect on the areas around them, and I'd like to know what that is
Right.
before we go do it.
Yeah.
That's-
And I'm saying something very broad stroke. I mean, this would have to be, they'd have to sit down at the table more than once to figure out, okay, if we did a pilot or a test, you know, what would it look like? How would it work? What would be the reporting system? I mean, I'm not coming up with an exact solution tonight, but I'm just bringing that forward as an opportunity to test it out, so to speak.
Yeah, I would have some concern on behalf of the people in the test, that if it required them to put capital expense
Well,
in
that-
because of fans or kitchens or anything else,
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
to say, okay, you can do it, but we can yank it after 2 years, is going to make it very difficult to get them to want to do it.
right.
And maybe it's
Right.
I don't
just-
disagree, I don't disagree, that would be
But you're
nice.
right, there could be, yeah, funds
But
involved.
I have
That
no
would be a
idea
tough
whether-
business decision.
I have no idea whether the places that, of business that they have now are large enough to have a section
To
created.
do one of those, yeah, the
to-
nursery.
to
Or,
create-
or even an
Yeah,
adjacent section. I don't know what's,
Or an adjacent
don't know what the
Parameters are.
what the locations are like down there. The current dispensaries, though, they do sell prepackaged edibles.
Correct.
Whether it's brownies or gummies or whatever, for off-site consumption.
Off-site consumption, exactly.
And once you get outside the door, you're in a public place, and off-site consumption is not allowed. There, it's allowed in your home.
Yes.
I think there's,
Okay.
what was it, 50 feet, or, it was in our packet, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but I think you have to be like 50 to 80 feet or something from the dispensary before you could consume it.
An off-site even means
Yeah.
within the parking lot, within the site
Right.
itself. So
Was
it
in our-
really, the
Off-site
safe,
means outside the parcel.
Really,
where
pretty
the
much that's
business
what it
is.
means.
Okay.
I would just point to, I know there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about here, but the pilot program, I'm getting nods here, which sounds like, or feels like there's potentially some consensus on that piece, but I'm also hearing some concerns on it from a financial standpoint. But maybe that's the baby step that this commission feels comfortable with at this point.
The financial question is not our question. It would be a question for an individual business owner.
And remember, we have 3 of these businesses that would qualify for that.
Right, right.
And Port Hueneme has kind of a roadmap from that standpoint in terms of whether it ends up being something that's opened right next to these businesses that already exist or within it.
Yeah.
Now, within it, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot that needs to be done or prepared.
Are there any lounges currently open in Port Hueneme, or are they
Not
all
currently open.
in process?
They're all in process at this point.
Okay.
There's the opportunity for up to 5, but I think those the challenge with that is that the regulations are so new that they're still going through, just like West Hollywood. It sounds like as
Sure,
well.
trying to figure out who really qualifies and how easy is it going to be to do this at all.
Right.
I have less of a problem conceptually with the nursery because,
Over the edible,
because,
yeah.
it will,
Yeah.
over the edible, somewhat over the smoking and vaping for sure.
Yeah, me too with that.
But because with the nursery, you're not gonna consume the plants, you're gonna put them down on the floor of your car and drive home with them.
Correct.
And that keeps it all a private citizen's activity in the privacy of their own home, basically. And, you know, if that's a sideline that makes economic sense to the businesses that are here,
Right.
and to my way of thinking at least, has no impact on the community,
Correct.
then I don't have that problem. I do have a problem with on-site consumption if it increases the probability of intoxication detectable by the police or not. And I recognize the inequity with the alcohol
I do too.
business, and I don't know how to fix that. I just don't want to add to the problem.
Right, yeah. I hear you on that one.
But so maybe we have the logic of selling edibles that are not going to give you an instant reaction, at least for most people. The logic says to me, those are likely going to be purchased and not consumed immediately off-site, but at
already
home.
have the
Which,
ability to
which they
do.
already can do
Yeah.
in the, I presume that the dispensaries sell edibles now.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so they're already doing that. So, yeah,
So-
maybe the first test would be the plants.
Was staff suggesting 100 square feet? Is that what you?
Saying that's
And was that based on somebody, other people doing that size?
a round number.
It was a fair number. I don't know that I have a clear example of 100 square feet.
10 by 10?
10 by
yeah.
10, yeah.
But, did that number come from
That wasn't pulled from me.
Okay,
Not
so-
not pulled from Port Hueneme.
Or if they're going up, we
Specifically.
do need
So
to
we-
do cubic
we
feet,
Vertical,
though.
right.
Yeah, I think we'd have to
Could be
know
500 square
from
feet if you have 5 layers.
one of the companies, I'm sure there's a feasible square footage, not just the footprint, but vertically, because of the volume you could be growing, and I don't know what that number is. I mean,
I don't know that I can give you a definitive number. If this
Whatever,
commission is
Yeah.
comfortable with the nursery aspect in terms of the conversations that are going on here, the square footage could be something that's a mitigation piece as a part of that puzzle moving forward, whether that's something that's independent, something that's molded into,
Or do you talk about footprint, or do you talk about gross area of cultivation?
right.
Because you multiply that footprint by some number
Right.
of tiers,
Right, it's the volume of the space.
yeah.
pretty much, yeah.
There, I don't care.
Yeah. And maybe this is a question, I don't know if we have anyone, it looks like she left. The possibility of selling the plants from the existing dispensary. I mean, so essentially they would be growing them there. Is that something they have enough room to do, and would that be feasible? Or would it have to be a completely separate unit? Like, say for instance, like Port Hueneme has suggested it could be like adjacent to.
Yeah.
If there was a,
That was
if
the
it
lounge
available.
that was adjacent to, I'm not sure
The
where
lounge, you're right, the lounge was adjacent to or with,
Also? No?
or, no, that was
No,
considered
we're talking
independent.
about separate-
And that's an
a
independent
separate-
license that we're talking
It is,
about
it's a
as
nursery
well.
license.
Correct.
Cannabis nursery
Yeah.
license, right.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a carve-out of an existing facility or it's a new facility,
Right,
it's still a new license.
correct.
Right.
There's a lot to this. And we-
There is a lot to, it's like an onion, right?
Yeah,
I think it's important to, I appreciate the commission staying here versus starting to dabble in the rabbit holes, but still staying here.
right.
If we could we go through each of these and kind of
Yeah.
make a, maybe it's one piece that just doesn't feel,
Put it up on the screen and
Okay.
let's go through it.
May I suggest, though, we do need, it appears that with some people, it's a threshold question of the ability to smoke or vape. That there are, some of our members appear to be absolute, I'm against that. And I think teasing that out,
Equation.
That'll be one of the bullets on one of the charts.
yeah, it is, yeah.
because if that's the case, it may be that it is uneconomic,
Yeah.
according to the one
Sure.
consultant who spoke to us.
Yeah.
For them to consider having a lounge.
Right.
I would say this, that was one individual's opinion on the matter. One individual's opinion on the matter regarding
That's
West
good.
Hollywood's
Yeah.
Right,
preliminary
yeah.
data.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't work here in
Preliminary
this community
planning data on lounges that are not open yet.
that are not open yet.
yeah.
I think they're using sources from San Francisco and others.
Okay.
Obviously not within West Hollywood.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so if we go to can we all see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go to consumption lounges options, there were the two. One was the on-site consumption lounges within the M1 MPD zoning district, And then the second was on-site consumption lounges on the east end of Ojai Avenue, and that would be east of Fulton, within attachment C of the packet.
Right.
I would start by saying, personally, I would eliminate the east end of Ojai.
I
Okay.
would too, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely.
And then within the M1 MPD, then we have various choices as well to recommend.
So it sounds like East End, I just want to hear from the commission, it sounds like the East End pause, so the recommendation will be to pause East End for on-site consumption lounges, but the first one, which is on-site consumption lounges within the M1 MPD zoning district, there's the, now granted, this isn't meant to be all-inclusive of what I've identified here.
Sure.
It was really meant to be kind of a
I think it's-
springboard for
I
discussion.
think what you have outlined, though,
That's
is,
good.
is pretty comprehensive.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, so then we've got smoking, vaping, edibles, and then the second tier is the edibles only, and then looking at how this commission would make a recommendation for limited hours, number of lounges, alcohol consumption. I only put that in there because it would be prohibited. That's the
By state law, correct?
it's already prohibited by state law.
We
So
we don't really need to consider that if state law prohibits it.
But I think it's worth noting if there's a concern regarding whether or not alcohol.
Same
would
is
be
true of tobacco smoking.
Yep,
Yeah.
correct.
Either one could be sold.
I would tend to say at this point, edibles only, not smoking and vaping.
Okay.
But
I
I
would
think
agree with you.
we need a straw
Agreed.
poll here. Okay, well, we've got at
Yeah.
least three.
And
Okay.
then if,
That-
I would look at also at the limited hours.
I would, frankly, I would abstain from the question of edibles only. In other words, I don't know. I don't know enough personally about the issues of smoking or vaping of cannabis and the health impacts of
Well,
it.
yeah, I wouldn't
Those
be
are
talking in
existing
terms of
code.
requiring edibles only. My attitude would be, that would be all that I would recommend allowing at the moment. Whether an individual dispensary, which already sells edibles,
Right.
wants to open a lounge and sell edibles,
To consider.
that's a business decision.
Right.
I think the answer is probably they don't want to, but I don't know.
Right.
It's not something that I want to get into, but I am concerned at this point about on-site smoking and vaping.
Yeah, number one, it's against the code, let alone
Well-
potentially help.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, but the lounges in
Yeah.
in toto are against the code right now,
Correct,
so.
both, yeah.
So, as
I-
said at the beginning, anything we do is
It's gonna
gonna
change the code.
change the code.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, is that we're gonna have a code change here of some sort, no
Right.
matter what we do.
Right.
And I guess the other part of it is that if people are trying to create a convivial place to consume cannabis, they're selling a lot of cannabis that's going to be smoked by somebody somewhere.
Right.
And the question is, nobody makes you go into a cannabis lounge in other words, it's not like
At
you're
all.
going into,
Yeah.
you don't have to, well, I mean, it's not like you're going to a restaurant, you don't want to have somebody in the restaurant smoking because you don't want the secondhand smoke. You're probably going there to be with other people who are enjoying smoking
Yeah,
cannabis.
right.
And they don't mind it.
And you
So
probably would
I
invite
guess
the secondhand smoke in that case.
Yeah,
Right.
you might,
The
but.
woman from West Hollywood mentioned something, I mean, one of her scenarios was, they were gonna do like edibles only with a restaurant in a specific area, and then potentially there was gonna be a smoking vaping that was separate as an option. She just shared that scenario. Not that we would be doing it, but
But that they couldn't have the restaurant yet because
yeah,
of
they
other
could have the
rules.
restaurant, yeah,
Yeah.
because of the, yeah. But, I mean, somebody could separate it out, I
And
guess.
and I guess I'm dealing with Commissioner Lottis's statement earlier that I don't want to see a change in smoking. I don't want to have smoking anywhere in a public place in the city of Ojai. And I guess I'm not there yet, strangely enough. I guess I'm thinking that smoking cannabis may be different enough than smoking tobacco, that, and if it's in a place where other people have chosen to do it, do I want to step into that or not? But again, I don't know enough about the health impacts and the other things that are in consideration with tobacco and the banning of tobacco.
I mean, it's the same thing that you could buy your cigarettes and you have to take them home to smoke, so.
Right.
I
Yeah, it's
don't
very
know.
similar.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, and it's not that I'm not empathetic about, trying to find a way to do this, but, I don't know. I just find the fine distinction between tobacco and cannabis and possibly hookah is just, I don't know.
Distinction without a difference?
Yeah. So I really have a lot of trouble with that, and
Well, I think we have a consensus of three at least in terms of taking the baby step with regard to edibles. I suspect we might have a similar consensus with respect to the nurseries.
Okay,
But
let's not jump ahead.
Okay.
The nurseries is
to
the
go to
last
the
piece.
next
Let's.
Another
Okay.
slide.
I think it'll be
yes.
fairly quick, hearing from the commission from earlier comments, but the second piece was the retail dispensaries along the east end of Ojai Avenue. Now that's different than the lounges. We're talking the dispensaries where you're allowed to sell on site, but then those products are then consumed off site.
Similar to what we already had.
But your
What
fourth
we-
bullet there
what
says
already
no
exists is-
expansion of dispensaries.
Right. So we can, although I will say and agree with what Councilmember Wyrick had said earlier, there wasn't a discussion on expanding. It was really more of a focus on
Relocating.
or giving those businesses the opportunity to be more kind of front and center, certainly along Ojai Avenue. So, thoughts on this? I kind of, I've heard from the commission on certainly the lounging aspect, but not necessarily the dispensary aspect. It's slightly different.
Well, I recall at an earlier meeting we had on this general topic, Commissioner Bennett saying that among his acquaintances who use the product, they have no problem finding the dispensaries where they are now. It's not like they're hidden.
Right.
And my feeling would be leave them where they are.
Okay.
I am agreeing.
I'm okay with that. I mean, the
So-
only step I would consider is having a maximum limit, a certain number, maybe 2, maybe 1, I don't know, maybe 3, and a conditional use permit.
On East Ojai Avenue?
Yeah.
With the
Then-
conditional use
And,
permit.
Then, yeah.
maybe a size. I mean, if we have something very small, it's just a dispensary, it has a conditional use permit, so that it is thoroughly reviewed by the people that might be impacted. I don't know. I'm reluctant, but if we're very, very restrictive on the size and number,
And a
I
conditional
don't
use
know.
permit where it was.
I mean, I'd be willing to talk about it. I'm not saying I would go there, but,
I think we would generate a new issue of equity if you allow one or two dispensaries to move to a, let's call it a more prominent place in the community, and you don't let one or two do that, then the city
Probably
is.
3 or
is-
none, right?
Yeah, it should be 3 or none, I think,
Right.
because otherwise, the city is really picking winners and losers, and it
Agreed.
shouldn't do that.
And
Agreed.
it's over alcohol and
Agreed.
even the cannabis too in that case.
And I would be, and if they moved up there, I would be quite reluctant to talk about on-site consumption up there
I would too. I would
versus
not want it.
potentially
Yeah.
in the future, as we learn more, possibly allowing it in the M1 zone.
Okay.
Back to your previous slide, though, a bullet that we did not really address was limited hours, number of lounges.
I mentioned the limited hours.
You
yeah.
mentioned limited hours. I personally don't have a problem with selling edibles in a lounge during the same operating hours as people are selling edibles in a dispensary.
That's what I was gonna mention, because if you go in here, I think the hours were, was it 8, open 8 AM to, I think it was 10 AM.
10
PM.
10 PM, 7 days
And I
a
was
week.
just gonna say, I would just keep the same hours, but,
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
yeah.
All right.
But, so if we did talk about the edible on-site consumption, that's what we're talking about, right?
That's the edibles-only lounge, yes.
Are we talking about only the 3 existing dispensaries would have the option to do this, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yep, no expansion.
Okay.
Correct.
okay.
Well, I must say that I'm not in favor of moving anything up to Ojai Avenue myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's,
if it's
That's me.
3 or 0, then I would vote for 0.
Agreed. Yeah, well, I mean, I was just trying to,
Give
and
Nice.
I've allowed now.
least to talk about it.
I've allowed the chairman twice to quote me, and I just thought I shouldn't leave him hanging there quoting and not letting people know I agree with his observation. It's not a use, I think, that we want to put on, on our
I
main
agree.
commercial avenue.
yeah, I'd like to, I'd like other things to have creativity out there and what could happen. Yeah.
So getting back to the retail dispensaries along the east end of Ojai Avenue, I think I'm drawing a consensus that it's either, well, not a consensus, but I'm hearing right now, and I think we need to draw out some of that, a discussion of 3 or none. And I'm just not with the CUP. I know that was discussed as well. There is the discussion of an overlay with this as well, because dispensaries, if you do it within the C1, then we're looking at the standpoint of drawing on those buffers each time, or looking at the option of some sort of a zoning tool. I'm not saying that
It
the
hits the
overlay
land use
is
table.
the solution, or you're using some sort of a zoning tool to achieve that type of use that's still within the parameters within the state law, as well as any sort of changes that would then come from our local regulations. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Just trying to-
but I think
to
if,
frame it.
if we were to vote on the question about retail cannabis
Dispensaries, not the lounge.
dispensaries, not the lounge, on Ojai Avenue, that you might find that the 4 of us don't have, there's not a majority in favor
Right.
of that.
Yeah, because we're kind of, I'm noticing some consistency among some, but not consistency among the majority.
Well, then let's just take a straw
Take a
poll
question,
on
right.
retail dispensaries on East Ojai Avenue.
No.
I'm going to say no for now.
For now, yeah.
No,
That doesn't mean I'm not, well.
no, no.
The rest of you
No,
later.
and I agree, no. So
Okay.
Okay, so there's not discrepancy.
That's
It
clear,
sounds
yeah.
like we've got a pretty clear
I think what we're
recommendation.
saying is too,
And that's fine. Look,
Is, like,
That-
here we are tonight, but because this is so new, and I mean, I'm gonna be off the
2 years,
commission, I'm not
well,
gonna get to do, but it's more that we're open
Yeah.
to looking at this again as we move
Yes.
forward. and other
Exactly.
cities move forward.
give us some more data when it exists.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, a year, 2 years from now, I mean, you know,
There's an open.
I have big concerns, but I'm still willing to talk.
And I only quote people for whom I have great respect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so then the third one is nursery options. And then we're looking at indoor nurseries only, cultivation licenses located in the M1 MPD district. Note that that is not within the C1. We're only looking at the M1 MPD. That was really the
Basically, the current locations.
correct.
Although, would there still be a 600-foot buffer for a nursery operation as
Yes.
opposed to a dispensary?
Yes,
Just because there's cannabis involved?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But if there is no retail sale by the entity that's growing these plants, can't they be, and might it be better that they be in an agricultural zone as opposed to in anything that's close to residential and/or manufacturing?
If our city had, what we do have an ag zone, but that the only area that's located as
Up
in the
at the
northern,
top of Daly.
the northern part of
That's
Ojai
the
Avenue.
only place.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that's gonna work.
it's pretty close to residential.
This is a whole new
I-
use in this.
It's really, I think the focus of that is it's meant to be industrialized in terms of how it's handled and addressed.
Right.
Right.
It's all grown inside.
And with technology, by today's standards, it really can be. And I think there's been a lot learned over the last maybe 20 or 30 years from an agricultural standpoint.
And my feeling is that a nursery is not going to have the same impact on the community that on-site consumption would have, even of just
Well,
edibles.
yeah, I mean, I want to make sure we've got
There's-
some really strict conditions. Filtration, I don't know, whatever.
Odor
whatever it
control measures are
needs
something that
to
we've been already
the
starting
smell.
to look at. Right. The odor is certainly one. I mean, being as water wise as this community is, the water circulation and making sure it's as efficient as possible with every drop.
Well, that's a good
used.
question, because I think marijuana growing is water intensive, isn't it? I'd like to know what the
Yeah,
water, I'd like to know what the
I
water
don't know that I have the
usage
official data
is.
on that.
That's another
Um,
piece of this,
And then compare it to.
talking
other
about it.
groups.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they did a recirculating system and
There
you know,
would be ways
filtration,
to be more
they
efficient
could collect
about
it, they could probably be reuse on
But I
some of it. I
really
mean, some of
wanna
it's gonna
know
get
that
absorbed, but.
And anything that they do is gonna be at least as efficient as the rest of the agricultural industry in the valley, which mostly pours water into the ground.
Right, but this water, because it would be indoors, it's a different situation, yeah,
And I agree with the need for odor control,
right.
but I think fans are
Filtration,
gonna,
yeah.
filtration and fans are gonna be part of the mix
Right,
with any of these
operations.
sub-industries, if you will. And it's, selling seedlings is not going to contribute to an increase in DUI because nothing is intoxicating in that process.
Right,
I personally don't care whether people grow marijuana in their homes. I don't,
but they can, people can,
but
yeah.
if other people want to, that's fine with me. And so I would not object to a nursery operation. And whether the city council, I like limiting it to the M1 and MPD, the current area
Right.
where the dispensaries are, maybe in a different building, I don't care. As long as we're maintaining the same buffers around schools, then I say have at it, and I don't care if it's 100 square feet or more than that.
Right, because
There may be
Yeah.
economies of scale in this business that none of us understand right now.
Which can happen in any
Yeah.
nursery trade. But
Right.
yeah, I would take out the maximum, because we don't know if that maximum 100 square feet is realistic or not.
Right. Mind you, this was meant to be a discussion, not something
was
where
good
I was
that you
looking
put
at
it up
one.
Wasn't a
Okay,
proposal for a
just-
specific number.
But I think we need some limits,
Yeah.
like how many, the size,
If there were 1,000 seedlings, would there be 167 people all come in and each buy 6 seedlings?
Yeah,
My
the
sense
economy
is
of
not
scale, I think,
likely.
is a valid point, because at certain points, if they're, I mean, talking hypothetical, let's say, for instance, it's only allowed to be a nursery. So once it reaches a certain level, where does it go from there? Does it go back to the original manufacturer, which is completely off-site, more than likely, from the
When it
city?
reaches a certain, you're talking about
I'm
the
talking
individual
about the
plants.
individual plants.
Yeah.
Are they then required to be destroyed? What happens
right,
after
that
that
was my next
standpoint?
comment. That's
So
what I was-
those are pieces, if we
I
put.
think one
as-
of our speakers said something about that.
Yes,
Right.
yes, she did, and had a lot of information
Assessment
about how
Collective
to
lady?
essentially regulate this issue.
Yeah. Because they're gonna be staging it and cycling it. I mean, they're gonna have plants at different stages,
Yeah.
Sure.
you know, a rotation.
Yeah, because if you're wanting to start from the ground up, you
Yeah.
have that option to purchase.
And odor control is going to dictate plucking them out and moving them out of town or destroying them potentially at some stage where odor becomes a problem with an individual
Yeah,
plant.
and I'm not sure what the, what's out there right now. And, I mean, there are other growers that are growing indoors, so I'm sure that this has been tackled somewhere.
I think part of the reason why council was so interested in tackling this is
It's
it's the
in-
whole idea of
it's in-
rather than driving down the hill to get the product, the
It's
product
local.
is here. It's
Yeah,
locally
it's-
sourced.
It's a local business, and
It's a local
That's
business.
convenient.
If we're talking about vehicle miles traveled,
it's a good
you could
thing.
apply that same logic to any business that does not currently exist in Ojai. And there are, as
Right.
Commissioner Bennett mentioned one example, there are a number of businesses that we probably would all rather not have in Ojai. But the argument that we should have them so that people don't have to drive to Oxnard or Ventura for them is fairly thin.
It's an economic discussion for sure.
It-
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is.
But
So it sounds
But
like
it
we're,
sounds like it's a small, I mean, this kind of thing would be a small scale
Yeah, I don't,
operation.
right. I think that's,
Not talking-
well, that's the thought
That's to
process.
be
with it.
I would be in
defined.
favor of a
Yeah.
CUP on a nursery
Agreed, yeah,
that has
yeah.
some limit on size, and I don't even know what that should be. Let's leave it to council to think about for the moment.
some research needs to be
And
done on
it
that.
would have to have certainly conditions on filtration, fans, odor control, those kinds of things.
And then
Water
I-
consumption is gonna scale with the size of the operation.
You know, there are a lot of these that are taking place in storage facilities. And interestingly enough,
You
where
mean
do
like
we,
Condor?
where do we have our storage facilities but Bryan Place or
Right.
Bryan Circle?
Yeah, because it's all controlled lighting
And
and,
I used to have a unit with a nonprofit that I was involved in, and we had actually several units in a storage facility. You would open the door to the interior, and it was unmistakable. The odor that would strike you, I had no idea what it was, but somebody said, "Oh, well, I'm sure that they've tapped into the water
Some of this
system
going
here."
on already?
Oh, yeah, I think it is. I don't know. This was not here in Ojai. This is in Los
okay.
Angeles, so don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if
Yeah.
it wasn't going on here. But they'd have to have a source of water, and
Water and light.
yeah, light you can get because you can plug in.
But, so, in contrast to the on-site consumption idea, the nursery idea would be could be separate businesses from the three?
It requires a separate license.
So they
So
could
think
be
about it, a
within-
consumption
That's a question.
lounge.
Would we require the nurseries to be a part of this, the current three businesses, or could it be a fourth business, a fifth business?
Independent of that.
Yeah.
That's a valid question.
So I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, originally, I was looking at the three existing businesses either having it
That's what I was-
internally,
So they could sell it as
so they
part
could
of
grow it
their.
internally to what they already have, but I suppose they could also buy, lease another building or space within the
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 allowed
M1 or
zone.
the allowed MPD zone district. They could do that also, but I guess what we're saying is limiting to the three existing businesses having the opportunity to have it within the existing dispensary, or, I don't know, maybe it's an and/or, because then they could grow it in one and they could sell it out of the dispensary even. But then they'd have like the growing grounds, if they rented, leased, or bought another unit
Or
within the
maybe they could
district.
grow it off-site or somewhere, so
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I suspect as
that'd be the most
an
convenient.
economic matter,
Yeah, it'd be,
the choice would probably be to grow it where the dispensary is and sell it through the dispensary.
yeah,
Not
exactly.
try to have a separate sales staff in another
Right,
location.
Right.
especially if it was
But
conveniently located.
That's a business decision again.
Correct, yeah.
So,
I would be open to limiting it to the three businesses with the two opportunities,
right?
At least for starters.
yeah.
If it
Yeah, but
went-
this is, we're
if
trying
it
This
to.
went
is-
well, maybe.
If I can, I still
go
have
ahead.
an open question. I think having the three businesses that exist sell these plants makes sense. But I think also, it could be that it is easier to get the approval of the county for this, and so people want to grow it in the county. Also, loading this stuff up onto a flatbed truck and bringing it down, delivering it to the three retail establishments is not a
Well,
difficult.
if someone decides to
decision.
set up a
Yeah.
nursery outside the city limits,
Yeah.
then it's not our purview, so.
That's the county.
That's,
Well,
that's,
just to
and
correct-
see, the
just-
other part of it is there's a lot
Just
more
to-
land.
I want to
out.
correct the record on that.
That's right, sphere of
Chair Quilisi.
influence.
There is a sphere, we already have a sphere of influence, and on top of that, any sort of cannabis activities in
That's
terms
right.
of growing, certainly the city has been heavily involved in ensuring that we're involved and that we're made aware of what's going on there, simply because
True.
of the odor that's been that
Right.
takes place. I
Yes,
think
and the
3
sphere of
years-
influence is slightly larger than the city limits.
Correct.
I agree.
but within the area of
Beyond that.
interest as well,
Yeah.
which really kind of goes down beyond the valley.
Casita Springs to Summit,
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah,
much.
pretty much.
Remember the ag
Here's
commissioner
what I want. Here's what I want to just make. Remember 3 years ago when you drive down with a 101 and you'd get into Camarillo? What was the odor that you were smelling? It smelled like a skunk.
that was.
That was before regulations.
Abe's Hemp's farm, right?
Right. There was
Yeah.
a temporary aspect, and that created a huge outpouring of the community being very much concerned with it, and certainly the city of Ojai got involved in that as well to ensure that we were at the table having that discussion. And there's lots of discussions, and certainly the board was involved in that as well, Ventura County Board. So I just wanted to correct the record. It's not that it's out of our purview. If we certainly the city, even though it's outside of the city's boundaries, we certainly have an opinion
We
about
could
it.
have some opinion and some influence, but what I was making a point is the planning commission here is not going to make that decision. Yeah.
Right.
And as far as the conditions, again, as long as we put on conditions that limit the odor, that restrict it to the existing businesses, I'm okay. I know over the years, since the dispensaries have opened,
Limited size.
I'm sorry, and the size,
And I think that's to be
Yeah,
limited,
we
but it's
wanna-
to be determined because we don't factually right now. I'm sure
where
there,
are
you know,
there-
there's a
yeah.
minimum amount of square footage.
where
or-
are there seedling nurseries right now, and how are they working?
I know.
I
There
thought
are
I
some-
saw a hand raised in the back
are some
there.
in the-
Is
in
that
the
a
county.
question you can answer, sir?
Oh, if you could
Come on
come to
up
the
to the
front, if
podium.
the
Yes,
chair is
please.
okay with opening
I'm-
public comment
We
again.
can reopen the public hearing for the purpose of commissioners asking a question
Yeah, for some
of a speaker, and then we'll close again. So
Thank you.
please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my name is Matthew, and I'm one of the licensed manufacturers here in Ojai.
Oh, good.
Oh, you have one of the two manufacturing
We are
licenses.
Ojai's finest, and I was just asking which licenses would you open up nursery license to? I know you're talking about the 3 retail, but is it the other 2 cannabis manufacturers as well?
Well, we did say,
So you don't grow, you just.
We do manufacturing, so cultivation is a separate type of
Right, this-
license.
Okay.
We're
And
talking about-
nursery would fall into that.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're talking about
right.
cultivation
Mhm.
and the opportunity for the 3 existing.
Well, I do have a question.
Dispensaries.
Right, we were talking about the dispensaries previous.
Yes.
Right,
What's the
but not about the manufacturing, which is a separate license.
Please,
as the
please
gentleman
stay
just-
with us for a moment, sir.
So
Go
what
ahead,
is the
Kathy.
process? I mean, are you going to come back to us with an exploration of the nurseries?
So in terms
How it
of,
might or might not apply to the different businesses?
right, depending on the recommendations that come from this commission tonight, we'll be taking those forward to city council, which then will further deliberate and then have a recommendation to staff to move forward, whether that be,
Oh, so we're not going to get a chance to talk about this further when we have more information?
That's up to the city council.
that's up to city council. And at that point, we'll be coming back to this body with some sort of, if the council says yes to one or more of these pieces to the puzzle, or none of them,
That generates a code amendment, then.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
there-
just, it's
See
just,
that again.
it's just hard to make a recommendation to council, and we haven't got enough information on the nursery thing. It's like, it really is kind of grabbing onto I don't know, amorphous cloud or something, going, well,
Right.
I guess it might be this or it might be that. I thought we were gonna make suggestions, and then staff was gonna go and do whatever, and then come back.
well, so regarding the nursery, if there is
There's
a consensus
interest.
from the
Yeah.
commission to move it forward, then,
Research.
and doing the additional research and saying, yeah, we want to take a closer look at it for X, Y, and Z
We can say that.
pieces, you can absolutely say that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the request. I
Yeah.
think.
And to the inverse of that, if the commission identifies, look, nurseries, we're just not there yet, there's just not a comfort level, then that's the consensus moving forward. I think we got that from the dispensaries aspect within the C1.
They're-
Yeah,
well,
may I
they're-
just deal
they're in
with
favor, I'm sure.
what I think the question is that the gentleman in front of us has,
Right.
and that is, and I may be wrong about this, but we have 3 retail dispensaries currently. Would the people licensed as manufacturers also be able to apply for a license to grow? So if we're making,
To do retail sales
no,
of
not
seedlings?
retails, no.
We never said they were retail either, we just said nursery.
Yeah, I will.
Wholesale.
Yeah, I
both.
could, if, could the people licensed to manufacture also grow and sell at wholesale to the retail dispensaries?
But they might want to
Because-
sell to other people outside the city, too, possibly.
Well, most of the retail, well, I don't know, most,
So-
I'm sure a lot of the retail sales from the dispensaries are to people who live outside the city.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the manufacturer. What is your customer base? Who do you sell
Yeah,
to?
and are you
Well,
interested?
he doesn't yet, as I understand it.
So, my understanding is a nursery is a type of cultivator. Retail, right now, I know Shangri-La is currently selling clones already, but they're not actually able to grow them to sell,
Right.
right? So he's able to carry clones after they become a mature plant, after a certain point in their life, then they become flowering state. Now he can no longer sell that because now it's a mature plant.
Well, you're saying the dispensaries are already selling,
You can sell a clone, a
selling
seedling.
so-called seedlings,
Correct.
but they can't grow them.
Yeah, it's not a mature plant, right? And that's what a customer can purchase to then grow in their privacy of their home, up to 6 plants per
But,
household.
but,
So
but
the
do they,
dispensaries
do
are
they,
already selling seedlings.
and are they propagating the seedlings, or are the seedlings things that they bring in to
There should be a nursery that takes a distributor to take it to the end customer, which is either a larger cultivation site, like a big farm, or a retail dispensary to then sell the seedlings or the clone.
So they're
Or someone
buying,
with a manufacturing license?
A manufacturer doesn't grow; they just get the mature.
I know it's a
plants.
separate license from your
Correct, yeah.
manufacturing license, but
would you be interested?
I would be
Okay.
interested in growing, seedlings to supply to a dispensary or even a farm.
the products that are the end result of your manufacturing processes today, do you sell to the retail dispensaries in town?
I will.
He's not open yet.
Oh, you're not
I'm
open yet.
selling it.
Oh,
Okay.
Right.
Okay,
okay.
it's all new.
As I'd said at the beginning of the presentation, we have two manufacturing. Neither one of them are open yet, but they both,
Oh.
yeah.
Okay.
So they're both
Okay, yeah, that's right.
nearing.
So
I missed
a
that
lot
part.
going on
But
here.
that would be the plan.
The three dispensaries are open.
Right, so
Yes.
essentially, we had just said we would allow the three dispensaries to have the opportunity to do a nursery, whether it's retail, wholesale, or a hybrid. That's to be determined. And now the question has come, would we consider adding the two manufacturers? That would be like a total of 5 businesses who would have the opportunity to get the nursery license and either grow inside their existing operation and/or lease, buy, rent another unit in the district and cultivate, grow the plants.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Yeah.
If it plays, in terms of cultivation for manufacturing, have you done this in other communities, in other cities?
Have
What's
I
your
done
experience
Have you
with
ever
this?
had a Title IV license or whatever it is that's
Right,
cultivation?
and not in Ojai, obviously, but
No, I am familiar with the nursery license, to the extent that I know odor's been a major concern that you guys there's so many regulations that the state throws before us to make sure that all of that is mitigated. When they're a baby plant, there's virtually no odor like
Yes.
what a mature plant, like when you drive down through Camarillo when they were growing hemp,
Right.
and it smells like skunk. There's really no odor to the seedlings. As far as square footage, 1 by 2 foot, you could have 72 little seedlings. You could have thousands of them in a small footprint, especially if you do tiers.
so for instance, a 10 by 10.
Yeah, and a lot of the times
There
when
you go,
cultivation
Lucas.
licenses
That's a-
are,
That's a rancho.
Yeah. That's
when
huge.
you talk cultivation licenses, they go by canopy space. So that's like,
Right,
so even though you could have 1,000 square foot of canopy, the facility could be 5,000 square feet. So they're spaced out and you can move around and actually
Yeah.
have the irrigation and everything set up for that.
so you're talking about like a 2-inch pot,
They
like
come
a
in
rose
little-
pot?
Yeah.
Almost like a liner, 2-inch. I mean, I'm familiar with the
Rockwool
nursery
cubes,
trade.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't done cannabis, but other things I have or I'm familiar with. But, okay, so when we're talking about the sales, that's typically the size that the sale is going to be. Yeah, nothing bigger.
And you're
A
saying they're
seedling.
doing that now?
But they're buying,
No,
he's not.
no, I
No,
think we need
not-
to
no.
clarify
Oh,
that.
the other
It-
ones are buying them from a
They're already-
cultivator.
Right, they're already at
They're not
retail.
growing them
No,
They're not
I
actually
understand
growing
that.
them.
I understand
Yeah.
that.
Right.
But you're saying they are already selling these
Seedlings.
little seedlings in a plastic pack.
And
They're
they-
just
they-
not growing
They're just
them.
not
Yeah.
growing.
They're not growing them, so they're
They're
actually,
buying from a
License.
Not taking
wholesaler.
You're
Yeah.
not taking a seed.
correct.
Growing
Yeah,
it.
and that's our question is, do we want to allow those businesses to be able to now grow or cultivate them instead of buying them from somebody
Right,
else?
but if I'm a consumer of cannabis in town,
Yep.
I can go to my dispensary and get little pony packs,
Yeah.
4x4
It's-
Already.
It sounds like you can.
already,
Yes.
if I want to grow,
Yeah,
and I can put them in
Your
my
6,
garden or
yeah.
bigger, or whatever. But 6 is the maximum.
yeah.
My basement garden.
But you can grow them outside.
Well, I'd
Yeah.
say let the big growers be out of town and let
the
the
smaller
little
grow-
teeny growers maybe be discussed for in town. I don't,
Okay, now, I recall from almost the first day, and goes back several years now, that the city council began talking about the cannabis business.
Right.
One of the things that we regularly heard from at least one of the dispensary owners, who arguably was operating illegally at the time and had a great deal of trouble as a result of that, there was always the discussion of, if you let too many people in doing this business, we will all die. Because there won't be enough business for any one of us to stay open if it gets spread
So
out.
Regulate the amount. or the
At the
quantity.
same time, I hesitate to say to one business, you can do that,
And you
and the
can't.
next door business, you can't do that,
Right.
even though you're equally capable of doing it. If there were something that said, so I'd like to see some differentiation there. Does the nursery license, I think it's Title IV,
Yeah, it
does
was-
that,
it
does
was-
that license discuss either wholesale or retail sales of the seedlings?
I believe it's just wholesale at this point.
Just,
You know,
oh,
So when you're,
I'm-
so
Okay.
as an indoor nursery, so just so the commission's, just to clarify once again, the indoor nurseries are not allowed, period, within the city. So we're talking
right
about
now, no, this
allowing
would be a
them.
new thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you're asking if there's regulations
No,
that the
I'm
city
saying,
has, no.
at the
gotta
state,
create-
at the state
State
level,
level.
the nursery license, does it say a nursery is a wholesale operation, or it is a retail operation, or it can be either or both?
You know what, I went online to look because it wasn't in our packet and I was curious. And I didn't see that, and that's why one of my first questions that I asked was, is this wholesale or resale, or can it be a combo?
Yeah, so the intent here is wholesale.
It is wholesale,
It
okay,
is
there we go.
wholesale.
Okay,
We got the
but if
answer.
it were a dispensary that had that license from the city and the state, then the wholesale operation would be from left pocket to right pocket
Right,
in that
right.
business.
Right, like they'd be,
Correct.
Yeah.
they'd have two businesses essentially.
But remember, they've still got to go through the state licensing.
Yeah, to get the nursery
Which is
license.
fairly
sure.
extensive in terms
Yeah.
of,
Yeah,
I mean, I
Well-
think you're experiencing that with the manufacturing, correct currently?
yeah.
Even though you've
A
gone
giant
through the
paper
city's
chase, I'm
requirements,
sure.
you still got to the,
In county as well.
and county, you've still got the state requirements
Yeah.
and
It's all
standards
new.
Yeah,
and
but
so.
a nursery, you cannot sell retail, like right out of the gates.
Okay, so it definitely
But-
is wholesale.
But
Yeah,
if you
thank
had a dispensary license and a nursery license,
Yeah,
you could do all that internally to your business?
The mechanics of it, I'm not quite
That's-
100%
yeah.
familiar with, but
Well, I think it's kind of a
it's,
critical
it's
question
in,
for
I
us.
agree.
what I'm
You probably
saying.
would buy it from their two separate businesses, you'd buy it from. and then
Correct.
sell it.
I think really what's critical here is identifying that each of these require an independent license, which is a little bit cumbersome, but at the same time necessary from
Right.
the regulatory standpoint.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, makes sense, okay.
Well, would it make sense then to say that we only issue nursery licenses to the wholesale cannabis businesses that exist or may exist in town, and the retail businesses can't? Or should we let them all do it? Or do we go back to picking winners and losers in terms of who gets to grow seedlings?
Well, I think, okay, so if you're a retail dispensary,
Yep.
you could go and apply for your wholesale license. You may have to have a different business name or open it up as a different entity. I'm not sure with the cannabis laws, if it's different from, say, regular agricultural licensing of a business. But then potentially, or let's just say they're two businesses. One is that they're cultivating, the other one is their dispensary. The dispensary could buy it from the wholesaler and sell it for retail.
Or the dispensary
Yeah,
would
so
be the retailer.
just-
Well, he
Yeah.
said you
Yeah,
couldn't.
they
or-
would be.
here's the,
They
I
can
mean,
keep it
when you think
separate.
about it, think about the number of businesses. So we have 3 dispensaries, 2 manufacturing. That's
Right.
5 in total.
And maybe one testing lab.
Well, yeah, we do have except for
Process?
it's not open. I don't know that it's ever going to open, to be
Well, he's not open either,
to be
so.
honest. Yeah, but I think he's really close to opening, to be fair.
He's smiling.
Yeah. The testing lab, we haven't heard from them in a while, so I'm not
Okay.
really sure where
Working
they're
on
at
it,
in the
yeah.
process. because we do keep up with these individuals, just from a clarification standpoint.
Right.
5, right? We're looking at 5, 3 and 2, 5 total. Potentially. So because we were talking about 3 and we were just talking dispensaries, but manufacturing could potentially be in the game as well. Right now, I'm just saying limit to, right, I'm saying limit, or at least it's being identified here, limit to the M1 MPD.
Yes.
That would say 5 at this point. There isn't a limitation in terms of the number.
Right.
And the state certainly
I
doesn't put that
presume
limitation
that the
on.
manufacturing business is subject to the same buffer zones and
Yes.
all of that, so it will be located when it
And
opens.
so are the
Same
nurseries.
area.
Yeah, it's all within the cannabis family.
I mean, but I do remember when council was initially talking about the dispensaries, and then there were requests to grow, and it was hugely controversial, as I remember, and there was a lot of concern about it. So, I just would want to, if I were a council, I would want to have a lot more information about exactly what kind of conditions we need, where is somebody doing it, that it works, small scale, and if we can get a handle on all of that, maybe then we could talk about.
So you'd like to put it in the same box with these other things. We'll wait and hear about other people's mistakes and then try not to make the same ones.
Or council could come back and do the research, staff.
If staff can do all the research,
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like,
You need
I'm willing to be
parameters.
open,
Yeah.
willing to talk, willing to say, well, maybe consider this, but that's a long way from saying, yeah, that's a good idea. So,
Yeah, realistically, the data's not in front of you today.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we don't have that.
It's more of an idea.
yeah.
Consider it,
And
take
whether
that
it's
forward,
3
or
or 5,
don't consider it, take that forward as the
Whether it's 3 or
recommendation.
5, I think really depends on how comfortable we feel in being small scale and being really assured that that can work. We can get all the filtration and everything else that's, needed to really feel good about it.
It might make sense in the long run to say a nursery license or cultivation is a wholesale business,
Correct, yeah.
and it should only be carried out by wholesale businesses in the city. I guess we don't know enough to say one way or the other right now.
Well, they certainly don't need the retail, the wholesale business doesn't need, and it doesn't have a customer base that's coming and going, and.
No, it just
so-
makes deliveries to
And they
retailers.
could theoretically be almost anywhere, except, I guess the city was trying to put all these businesses in the same place, but they really are.
Well, the micro business, I believe, does cultivation and manufacturing and dispensing and deliveries, right?
Distribution.
Yeah, I would say
Just
deliveries is
deliveries,
the same thing as
distribution, whatever.
distribution, right? Or
Delivery
Other-
services.
maybe not.
There's retail delivery. There's storefront retail. That's retail.
Right.
And then there's distribution,
Oh my
which is where you would get flour from the farm or packaged from a distributor to the retailer to sell after it's been tested
Oh,
Yeah,
and finished product. Or in my case, I buy from a farm. I need a distributor to drive it from the farm
Right.
to me so I can make it into something, and then I get it tested, and then I need a distributor to take it from me to the retailer.
Wow.
So
Take
they're-
the packages that you've
the finished
Right.
product.
created.
There's
So
a
the 3
system.
retailers right now, to my understanding, is they're allowed to go to become a micro license, which is at least 3 of the 4 types of licenses: distribution,
Okay.
retail, not cultivating at this time,
That's
and
new.
then manufacturing. as
Okay,
well.
this is good. Thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
I know the micro business is vertically integrated. I
Correct.
didn't know whether it involved cultivation or not.
Yeah, cultivation is out of the equation at this
Okay.
point. Unless, obviously, we're having a discussion tonight.
Sure. But a micro business is a specific state license,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it would still require a nursery or cultivation license on top of it,
If they were gonna grow.
if that was gonna be done.
Yes.
Okay.
And a manufacturer could be a micro business, and if the city allowed it, could be in the cultivation business.
Yes.
The city doesn't.
No.
Well, I would say,
No.
yeah. Why no?
Because a manufacturer cannot be like myself or the Page family cannot be a micro because we don't even have a capability to become a retail.
Retail. Okay, so that's a good
Okay,
point.
so-
I hadn't thought about the retail. That's a good
Be
point.
A micro unless you are already a retailer.
Correct.
Yes, I
That makes
remember reading
sense.
that in the regs.
Thank you.
Okay. It sounds to me like maybe where we're sitting right now is we would like more information on the nursery or cultivation business too before we make a recommendation. But I suspect that we think that that data is more readily available than the data on lounges and that general area of the business. So maybe we can make, we've made, I think, a couple of consensus recommendations in terms of locating these businesses.
Yep.
And now on the nursery option, I'd say stand pat until we get more data, but we should get that data more readily than on the other areas.
Right, we're interested. We just
Interested,
don't
yes.
have enough information to make us.
'Cause
Chair Quillisi?
Yes.
I just wanted to jump in here. If the direction that the planning commission is going to head towards is for this to come back to the planning commission, I just want to note that we should discuss potentially when we'd like this to come back to the commission, because the commission has a lot of things on its plate, including the formula business ordinance and other issues which will need to be taken up. So we might want to discuss towards the end of this meeting whether we want to send the two recommendations or whatever recommendations we end up making. And if we ask staff to come back with more information, whether we should still send the recommendations that were made to the city council.
Yeah, thank you, Epi. I understand. At the same time, I hesitate to put another deadline on staff because when I look ahead and I see the cases that we're going to have to deal with, I know that there's a big bow wave of work that staff has to go through before we even see a case. And I would tend to say I'd like more information on the nursery option, and if we haven't seen something in 3 months, then we'll ask again a little louder for more data.
City council they need.
Well, here, I appreciate Epi's insertion here, because that was something I was going to mention here in a moment, but he's already beat me to the punch. We do have a lot on our plate, to be quite frank. The reality is that from what I was just hearing from this commission, it's from the nursery standpoint. There's certainly interest, and that's something that we can take forward to the council, but then identify that there isn't a consensus on how to move on that specific
lack of
aspect.
data.
Nursery,
Yeah.
because we don't have enough data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that may be enough
Thank you, sir.
for, thank you. That may be enough for the council to say, okay, staff, look at X, Y, and Z. And then we can go back and take a look at that and then reevaluate maybe. I mean, there's a couple different ways that could go. But I think identifying, because I think the hope here is tonight is that we're taking this forward with each of these three pieces, whether there's consensus on certain aspects or not consensus on others. It's just a matter of saying cannabis goes from this commission to council regarding those three points, and then going from there.
Do you feel like you've gotten a consensus from the commission on those 3 points?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. The nursery, and I think I have a consensus here right now. It's a wait and see. I think there's been some good discussion regarding it, but I also see some hesitation, and I think that has a lot to do with more information,
Correct.
right? So,
It's a wait and see, but maybe not as long a wait as the other stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, I think,
You know, my instinct is about it is that we can find that information, whereas the impacts that we're looking for some of the other determinations
Right.
are going to
We
require
can't-
the stuff
yeah,
to
we can't get
happen
that data.
someplace so we can
Before-
look at it before
yeah.
Right,
we're going
right.
to know, and that there is not a desire by this commission to be the first mover on those things which have those potential impacts that can't be found, whereas
Right.
Right.
in the agricultural side, I think we can do the research, or somebody can do the research and find the answers necessary to answer the questions that we would.
Right.
possibly-
I think what you're going to end up finding with cultivation is that those standards are fairly strict. And that's intentional. And I think the manufacturing sees that as well. And I think the dispensaries see that as well.
Well, I think that the restrictions would necessarily be fairly strict. Are they strict in terms of who gets to have a license to cultivate?
Right. So you're asking the specific question on who gets it. Like, does a dispensary manufacturer or
How they
independent-
have to operate that business once they get a license?
Yeah, and I think fair point to Commissioner Lottis earlier, stating that there was a lot of concern that was raised when the council brought
Right.
this up last year, and that was in regards to all three of these pieces as to where they go. To Councilmember Wyrick's earlier point, I think the agenda was just to have one, but then the thought process going forward was just take all three of them. Let's see what comes from it, and then go from there.
All right. Well, I think you have our consensus then.
Yep.
Any last words from commissioners here? Okay, well, great. Let's move on to item 4, priorities of Planning Commission, our work plan. And that is a lengthy list.
Yes, thank you, Chair Quillisi. I would like to note right now, let us cross off review cannabis business regulations.
Yes,
And note that we
One
have
down.
now one less, and that we will now,
we have only 8 remaining.
yeah, we only have 8 remaining. Formula business, and I know we were talking about parking study program and trying to get that on an upcoming agenda. And I'm working hard to get that in the very near future.
Well, I think we were paused on the formula business issue.
Paused the challenge that,
Looking at what constitute digital marketing and things in that realm,
right, so,
which was
Online
gonna require
sales.
some research by staff.
right.
So I don't know where you are.
So I'm in the research phase. But
Good.
also, I'm reaching out to the community, the business owners, and we're
that's
looking
good.
to
good.
to work through that as
Full
well.
input, yeah.
But I will mention also that the formula business ordinance, if you recall correctly, the moratorium for that, and I'm just giving information, it's not a discussion, I don't want Epi to get mad at me, is August
Reminding
3rd
us of the
of
facts.
2022 is when that moratorium would end.
Unless it's extended by the
Unless
city
it's extended by city council. However, that extension, I think, is for an additional 10 months and 15 days or something like that.
That's the first
I'm-
extension,
I'm not.
after the 45 days.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a 45 days, and then there's
That
10 and a
already,
half
yeah,
months.
that went
And that's
that
what
went
we're
by
in
very
now, is
quickly.
the
and-
10 and a half months.
Right, but there can also be an additional extension.
Another year, I think.
I think the key point here is we've been sitting on this for a while. Let's not get into the Q&A on this. We've been sitting on this for a while. This commission is going to be seeing this sooner rather than later. I think is probably the way in which you're going to be seeing this.
Well, when you bring when you bring the research to us, I'll be very interested to go through it.
Yes, I will be ecstatic to bring it forward to this commission for discussion. So just know that, but I'm also making sure that we're plugging in the business community as well with this
Excellent.
as well. So I don't want to leave them high and dry either. So just know that. I think the parking study program piece is something that you're going to see in the near future as well, just as a discussion piece. I think
Okay.
I like to use this term a lot, but I think it makes a lot of sense setting the table for discussion. I think is an important piece for this, just to get the history and understanding the parking. we've had some recent projects, please do not name any of them, that have brought that up to light. And I think because of that, having this discussion regarding parking studies, parking programs, and everything involved with that, I think is a good, it's a good opportunity to start that discussion again. So,
I just have a question on that. Is there funding to do, excuse me, to do whatever the recommended parking study is, which I'm not even sure what that is?
that would have to go to council. So,
Oh, yeah, no.
council, yeah.
Is there city funds available to do a parking study, a recommended parking study?
You mean, has it been allocated at this point?
Okay, yeah, that question.
Not by council at this point. Council has asked for the commission to review it and then to bring forward a recommendation. And then at that point, we'd look to see where it fits into the budget.
Okay. Has there been any discussion or thought about assessing the businesses to help fund the parking study, since they create the demand for
There is an assessment district already within
visitor
a
park,
downtown
visitor,
district. Yeah, but
trips?
you're talking about like a separate fund created to
Some kind of an assessment district.
basically
There is an
to
assessment district
pre-fund
just
it.
for existing downtown
Yeah.
right now.
And that addresses
what
just
does that-
lighting
is that
district.
for-
and a lighting district as well. And that looks to
Lighting district, and there's an assessment district for what kind of improvements?
it's really meant for maintenance is really what
Okay,
it boils
okay,
down
yeah.
to.
I mean, has anybody talked about doing, assessing the businesses in downtown that generate the create the problem, so that, the tourists come in and whatever, we have too much traffic?
Part of the study would be to determine
Part of the
whether there is a
solution is that they would
problem.
contribute to the study.
Yeah, so think about a larger parking study. It would look at other ways to fund the situation, right? Whether that be through parking meters, that be through an assessment district, reevaluating the in-lieu fee aspect.
Oh,
I think
you're
those
gonna
are
have
all the pieces to the puzzle.
Oh, you're going to have
try.
a parking study that talks about ways to address,
Well, the
kind
parking
of a
study would-
preliminary study.
Yeah,
then.
the parking
I don't want to
study-
go down the road. Yeah, I don't want to get into the weeds on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Or
I
down a
didn't- I
rabbit
didn't mean
hole
to ask.
on this one particularly. But I think it's important to note that it's well received. I think you've heard from the community, certain individuals who were here earlier, that see a need for that. I mean, there hasn't been a parking study done since 1992, a full parking study. There was one done, Sherry, remind me, what was the year that Kaku did theirs?
2004, maybe?
Was it 2004? Anyway, the years escape my memory for
Been a
the
long time.
second one. It's been a while. That's just
Well,
a
I
fair
just,
point.
Kaku
Kaku was 91. Walker was 06. Okay. The
06,
Walker one was
okay.
06.
I
I was
mean, part of
confusing. I
the-
thought Kaku
Part of the
was.
problem is there's an inequity in how the parking requirements has been distributed through town.
Yeah,
And that-
demand
and
is
that also
demand is a term I
arose-
use a lot with.
It also recently arose, that inequity. And
Yes.
so it just seems like
Yeah.
assessing everybody who's somewhere in the downtown would be a way of addressing that inequity.
A fair share.
Yeah,
So
It's a fair
that's
point.
all.
yeah. Every property is different, and some of them.
Like I said before, I think setting the table for this one is important. Seeing the history of these parking studies of old in terms of how they've gone over the last 30 years, over the last 18, 16
There's some
years.
statistical measure of the demand for parking spaces, and then there's a count of the available parking spaces, and then you kind of move on from there.
Yep.
Is my sense of it.
Right.
Probably a good thing to do.
Definitely, yeah.
So anyway, that's the
Okay.
general.
And the fire suppression mitigation is a part of the general plan update, because it has a safety element.
Correct. That's a standard requirement folded into the safety element. We'll
And
be seeing that sometime in the near future.
the tree ordinance and MWELO,
You might have to call
we're,
me.
we're gonna have to look at some outside expertise.
You're
to
expert
kind of
witness.
testify.
this.
Well, actually, shortly after I started on the commission, 2010, our planning director at the time, came to the commission that night, and they said, well, we just came back from council, and council directed us to have the planning commission do the MWILO, the landscape ordinance, and the complete streets, because they were both mandated by the state, and the city hadn't done it yet, and because of the economic downturn at that time, they weren't gonna hire consultants, so we were assigned those tasks, and they just looked at me, and I think that was maybe my second or third meeting, and it was like, okay, you're the chair. But anyway, I did it, and I'm willing to, if you guys need a helper, I mean, you could call me.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard not to, I'm gonna miss you guys.
Come in on Wednesday night.
I know, it's like a real habit. Yeah, but anyway.
Okay, well, the long and short of it is there's a lot of stuff on our plate.
Yeah.
But tonight.
It's
we
on
can
your
cross-
plate first.
I
And
know.
then you come dump it on our plate
Right. So I get.
as
I,
quickly as you can get it prepared.
It's hot potato at some point. So just know that tonight we get to cross one item off the list, and just know that there are two other ones that are close behind it. So.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on then to item 5, the future agenda items.
Yeah. Okay, so May 18th, I have on here the Becker Development Agreement for the 4 sites. That is getting moved to June 1st. I'm still working through the.
Well, a little background
some
for
of
the
the
other
pieces.
commissioners. I have to recuse myself on that,
'Cause it's
on
in
that
your-
one,
yeah.
because my property is too close to a part of that deal.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so yeah, you'll have to recuse.
And so we would be down to 3 commissioners unless there are reappointments or new appointments or something to deal with the 2 terms that are expiring this year.
Yep. Yeah.
And I don't know where that's going, only council knows.
Well, and I think they were surprised by Kathy and had not put it
She
in there.
threatened 4 years ago.
I know. Well, that takes a long memory.
Just to keep the commission on task here.
Okay, yeah, so, all right, so
The sign program and the lot line adjustment.
PDP is moving to June 1st.
Yeah, all 3 of those are not ready for the 18th. So just be aware of that. We'll have the general plan update, and more than likely there'll be something else that will not be current planning related, but more than likely advanced planning related. So you saw that list that we just looked at a couple
Yeah.
moments ago. You're
You see
likely
that
to see something
DRP
there.
on 1010 West Ojai Avenue moving up 2 weeks?
No,
Okay,
no way.
all
There's
right.
still things to be worked out there that we're in discussions with them on.
Where's 340 East Ojai Avenue?
Huh?
Where's 345 East Ojai Avenue? Who's that? This is East Ojai Avenue.
Correct. Yeah, so it's
So that's,
345. That's Topa Brewery.
oh, okay.
Oh,
That's one of the locations, but it's a sign program because there's several businesses within that.
Right, that complex there.
Correct. And it because of the number of signs that are proposed, it triggers a sign program. So just know
Yeah, that
just know
building
that.
has the brewery and it has the dry cleaners
Dry
and it has
cleaner.
decor.
Right.
But there's also a Somas, which is
That's
a
right, the
restaurant.
little restaurant,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you've got
There's a restaurant in there?
yeah. Yeah, which is the reason for triggering this sign. I don't want to get into the details. I can't
That's
get into the details yet.
I was just wondering
thank
where
you.
it was. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of laying out the 18th and the 1st.
You think something
I really-
not currently on the list is going to pop into the 18th?
Yes.
and there's been some shorthand on this, I think, this Becker Development Agreement, which is the first of, is this the first time we're seeing this?
Yes.
Yes.
It is, okay. Was there something in the newspaper about it?
The Becker agreement?
Yeah.
There may have been something
There was an
recently.
article.
There wasn't.
Shortly after it went
4
to city
parcels
council.
in town that are part of the agreement.
Right. Okay, maybe that's what, it just seems that I know something about it, but I'm not.
And it's all housing and some of it's affordable.
Yep.
Okay.
There'll be a lot of information coming forward on that. I'm just working on the last pieces to that puzzle to be able to bring that forward. Okay, so will there be something else that'll fit into that? Yes. Are we going to have the meeting on the 18th? Yes. I think that's what we can expect.
Okay.
And I'll be working through those details over the next.
Well, we should be doing general plan update in some fashion anyway,
Correct.
so, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a couple of things from a general plan update standpoint that we still haven't discussed. Environmental justice is one of those. So
A definition would be welcome.
I look forward to diving into that one. Okay, so that's the tentative agenda at this point.
Okay. And pending is even farther in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
At this point.
Okay.
I'm looking at ways to bring those into the near future and not the far future. But there's the work program, which is taking priority right now. So we're working on getting that
Okay.
unclogged.
Well, we're down to director's report. Now, that was you, okay. Commission members' reports. Anyone have any other items of interest to the commission?
I note that Fire Stick Pottery is the one where we have somebody who has a lighted sign with chase lights, like Christmas tree bulbs in blue and green, and that is, it's just by the lumber yard, but it's in the city, and
it's
driving
contrary
me-
to the code.
It's driving me nuts. They have 4 or 5 signs on that property. They've got a couple on one
Code
side of the
compliance
street.
issue,
That's a
sir.
whole nother thing.
I can't go into the details, but we're working
Working on it.
with them through code compliance
Okay.
currently, and I believe the lights have actually been turned off or removed altogether.
Maybe they've been.
So I would say-
within the past 1 week, I've seen the lights on.
Okay, so
Within the-
check tonight. I'll be driving in that direction tonight.
Me too.
I'm fairly certain those have been turned off, but
Okay, but the bulbs
Or-
are still in.
huh?
The bulbs are still in, but
Yeah.
But turned off.
maybe, I don't know.
Okay. I was under the impression that the bulbs have been removed, but I'll be driving by even tonight because it's on my
It's
way
hard
out
to
of town.
see the bulbs because they're dark colored. They're
Yeah, they blend in.
blue and green, and they blend in.
Right.
yeah. But
Okay.
So they have 4 or 5 signs there.
I can't go into the co-compliance component of it, but just know
No,
it's
no,
it's
just-
within the
Noting a potential need for code compliance action.
yes.
Right. Okay.
Okay, any other commissioners?
You know, I did attend the April MAC meeting,
Oh, yeah.
and I took notes, and I totally forgot about it, and for the life of me, I can't remember much. It was a short meeting, I will say that, but I think, I do remember something about, they're having an in-person meeting, which they specifically voted on in June, and I think they are just, part of what is going to be on their, or maybe I think the focus of the meeting, because they're having traffic engineers, Caltrans people, I think, they're going to be talking about the highway down through there.
That is, it's taking a little bit of getting used to with that new left turn off of Creek Road
I like
onto.
it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's a
that's-
great
yeah, it
idea.
is.
Like a merger lane.
Looks like
Much
it's gonna be a
safer,
lot safer.
Much safer,
A
yeah.
lot safer.
Was Matt DeVere there?
Yes, and I met him. So I introduced myself yeah, there's several of the MAC commissioners were not there. So it was a real
Oh,
quick meeting, and
Okay.
not much happened, but I'll bring my notes next time.
The next MAC meeting
Oh,
is
yeah.
May 16th. I don't know who's up for that one.
So it's the Monday before our regularly scheduled.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
Well, I hope it's not Vice Chair Nolan.
No, it's
Okay, okay.
Well, I have one more commissioner's report then, and I want to thank this nice lady on my right here, not just for her service for 12 years on the Planning Commission, which takes a lot of tolerance, a lot of thin skin, a lot of hours spent at home reading, and as I said previously outside this meeting, I will miss your good humor, your skills, and your institutional memory, because you have all of it now on this currently constituted commission. And so I suspect we will be asking you questions here and there in the future, and we will all, but I want you to know that personally, I will miss your participation in these meetings. And to that end, my wife cooked up a coffee cake this afternoon, and after the meeting, I'd like to share it with everyone. I brought plates and plastic forks and a cut-upable coffee cake, if you're all up for it, just to say thank you. I am hoping, I don't know what happened when John Merck retired about 4 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that.
He was 20 years.
He was over 20 years on the Planning
yeah.
Commission.
Way
I
up.
presume he got something in terms of recognition from the city, and I would hope that you would. I mean, we've got
probably up there.
10-year service recognition up here.
Oh,
And
wow.
you passed that,
Wow.
Yep, there.
and so,
Right.
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that there will be something more tangible that comes from the city, but tonight we have coffee cake.
Well, I accept. Thank you.
And
I definitely want to also thank you so much for your expertise, your just weighing in on the issues that we have always been well thought through, and you have the expertise on things that, I don't know, the rest of us, I'm not sure how we're going to cover it,
You can call
because,
your lifeline.
yeah. Anyway,
I
thank
text
you-
her
thank you very
occasionally with a
much.
picture of a
He does.
tree and say, what is this?
And then I send him back the identified.
She tells me what it is.
Yeah.
And we have bought one of those pear
Well, there you
trees.
go.
Anyway, so,
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. I've really enjoyed working with you, staff and the commission. And it's going to be kind of weird after 12 years to not, in 2 weeks come to planning commission. So, but there's always a time for something to close and end.
right?
And if you do need to call me or text or email me about a question, please feel free to do so.
And never say never.
Well, that's
We
true.
don't know what the commission will look like 2
Yeah.
years or 4 years from now.
That's
so,
true, yeah.
Let's do that. Anyway,
Okay.
there being no other obvious business before the commission, it is 9:12, and I declare us adjourned. Thank you all.
Let them eat cake.
Coffee cake is in the kitchen. I'll get it.